Good. Well, the colleagues are joining in. Um, let's start a little bit housekeeping this morning, ladies and gents. Those of you not that comfortable with Zoom yet, the platform we're using to do this, um, you're welcome to use your screen and the options on your screen to make the session more convenient for you. So you'll see at the bottom of your screen, if you move your mouse, you will see at the bottom of your screen, there's options. The one is the chat box, that you can use the chat box to communicate with each other. And we also use the chat box during the questions and answers or panel discussions to see if there are any questions in the panel discussions. And then, yeah, you'll see the top of your screen. You can choose either to go to gallery view or speaker view. Speaker view is usually works well because then you have a view of the speaker and the majority of the screen is allocated to what you need to see. So it's a good option to do that as well. You're welcome. If you want to, you can open the participants box. It's also at the bottom of your screen. And the participants box, you can see who's online. And you can mouse over your own name. And if you want, you can rename yourself, your name dash company name, maybe if you want to, or just your name and surname is fine. It's always nice to see who's who on the meetings. And we can, yeah, it's great to see the faces. If you want to save some bandwidth, then you're welcome to switch off your video at the bottom of your screen. You'll see there's a mute option where you can mute and unmute yourself. And there's a stop video option where you can switch on and off your video as well if you want to save some bandwidth. But as I said, it's always nice to see the faces. We do not take questions necessarily during the presentations. We try to keep the questions for the panel discussions. You're welcome if there's a burning question to put up your hand. If you go to participants, in the participants box, you'll see there's options where you can put up your hand, you raise your hand if you have got a burning question, and we will see if we can take it. In case of emergency, colleagues, if something happens to this event, keep an eye on your email inbox. Then we will send you an updated link and we will just restart the session again should something happen. Yeah, I'm just wanted the guys following on YouTube, you're also welcome to text questions on YouTube. We will also scan that during the questions and answers to address them. Should we not get to all the questions and answer questions, in the chat box and so on, what we usually do is we use the content of the chat box afterwards, and we connect the questions still with the panelists and see if we can answer your questions via email. Yeah, after the event, we will share a feedback form and you can kindly give feedback on this event. We need your feedback to keep our standards high and make the transport forum work for all of us. And then the presentations will be uploaded to the Transport Forum's website. So I just want to share my screen this side so that we can get our presentations up, or our program up again. So there's our program. And you can see, let me just get to the right screen, the Transport Forum's website. This is the website we use to upload the presentations to. So take note of that web address. You can download the presentations afterwards, and actually all the presentations presented at the Transport Forum over the past 13.5 years are there available for you. So you need to log in to access your presentations. Should you not have an account yet, then you can select sign up under the user menu and you can create your own complimentary account. It will send you a confirmation email, and then you can log in with your own username and password. And once you've logged in, You can go to the website itself. You will see, if you select events and you go to downloads, at downloads, you will then be able to open a downloads little search engine. The download search engine it looks like this. You can go in the top field there. You can type in somebody's, somebody's name or surname, and it will give you all the presentation presented by that person over the past 13 years of the Transport Forum. Or if you want to, you can go to category, and you select category, and then you can select today's date, for example, or the date of the event, and it will open up all the presentations for that event. And everything is complimentary, and you can download them. I just want to draw your attention to our business directory. Olga Mashilu from Beleng Bondle Consultants, they administrating this for us, and also the revenue that they get through this business directory goes for them. It's our BE initiative as well. So support this business directory. Is only 450 rands a year. It's not money, and your company is listed, and this business directory is very popular. People are, visiting this and scanning through these companies very, very frequently. So maybe take a picture or take down Olga's number there, and you can contact Olga so that she can help you. Going back to our agenda, as we've mentioned, ladies and gents, this forum is free, complimentary to the public. And obviously, we've got valued sponsors to making this, for us possible. And there are many sponsors actually from the start of the Transport Forum 13.5 years ago has been supporting us. So I would like to give recognition to them. Our host today is the Bunye Group. When we start the session, I'll give Sizu an opportunity to just say a few words about our host today. Apologies for Vusele Majala. She contacted me this morning. She's got a crisis. She cannot be with us this morning, but Sizu from Bunye will do the welcome as well. So thank you, Sizu, for that. Let's start there with University of Johannesburg. University of Johannesburg got the Institute for Transport and Logistics Study. It was created within the Department of Transport and Supply Chain Management at the University of Johannesburg in response to the industry's need for independent, unbiased, relevant, and up-to-date research. Now, Prof. Jackie Walters and Dr. Nolene Pisa, they've been involved with the Transport Forum, since the start of this forum. So it's many years that they've been supporting us, and we really appreciate their guidance and support. We've got Paxi. Paxi is a parcel service that allows consumers, agents, suppliers, and institutions to send, collect, and return parcels to over 2,000 Paxi collection points. For your convenience, there's a Paxi point at every PEP. That's great, and they've, for a year now, a gold sponsor of us. So support them, and you can send your parcels from any PEP to another PEP anywhere in this country at very reasonable pricing. So this is a great service. We've got Kulula, Kome. We know that they're under business administration at this stage, but Ronel Stander and her people are still supporting the Transport Forum, and we looking forward when they're back in the sky again, that the Transport Forum can fly Kulula again. And we really appreciate Kome's support for this. We've got Global Trade Solution. I don't know if there's somebody from Global Trade Solution who want to say a few words, perhaps. And let me read you a little bit about Global Trade Solution. It is a user-friendly, cloud-based international trade and supply chain solution that incorporates the core requirements to manage all activities around international supply chain in compliant and cost-effective manner. They're the second year now gold sponsor with the Transport Forum. I would now like to give Phil Hendricks opportunity to tell us more about exciting news of Oricon. They've been a number of years already a gold sponsor with the Transport Forum. So Phil, you're welcome to unmute yourself and share your screen and tell us about the exciting news. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Harry. Let me get my screen up. That's come through clearly, Harry?
Yes, everything is good.
Okay, thank you. Look, I won't be long, no more than 5 minutes, but thank you very much for the opportunity. A number of you would have seen the communication the last 2 days that Oricon has changed its name. It's moved on. We're now Zutori. And I'd just like to give a bit of background to this. Starting perhaps with a short background on our story. You know, we've got all of us here, used to be Oricon, now Zutori. We've got quite a rich heritage. We've been part of the South African scene and African scene for the past 90 years. Started life, you know, if you look at all our companies in 1932 with Ninham Shand in Cape Town. And over the past 90 years, we've operated under different entities, Oricon, Ninham Shand, Net Group. And of course, we merged with the Australian company, Conal Wagner, in 2009, and we became Oricon. And of course, that was a very successful merger, allowing us to embrace sort of global perspective on things, significantly increase our expertise that we've got in our various resources across Africa, but also participate in world-renowned projects. We've worked in over 33 African countries, as well in a number of continents. But I think the one thing we've learned is that, you know, what works globally doesn't always translate into authentic African solutions. And some would say, listen, this is really a pretty bold step you've taken. But, you know, in October 2019, the African owners of Oricon decided that we were going to demerge from the global business. There was a feeling that, look, our primary reason really around the need to focus on Africa and the fact that we needed to get back to our basics and deliver a lot more value to our African clients. And of course, it's led to the birth of Zutori 2 days ago. But nobody, of course, would have, you know, predicted the impact that COVID-19 was going to have, the global pandemic on the businesses, on the macroeconomy, the world, communities. But it's interesting, when you look at the pandemic, you'll notice that it's accelerating the trend towards localization. Moving forward, it's all going to be about local resources, local companies, the use and the developing of our local skills base. And that's important to note, and that's going to continue unabated. Some would say it's been risky, it's been audacious, but I must say it's been well planned. Okay, we're still privately management-owned company, and the fact that we owners, you know, our commitment is real, and we've got a real vested interest in the success of our clients. So if you look at the new Zutori, you know, 90 years on the continent, great relationship with Africa, great local knowledge, but we will still be operating our global design centers. So the benefit for our clients is going to be that we will be seeing world-class solutions being offered to our clients. We will still be working on those international projects. So I think that's a great benefit. You'll see in a lot of our communications, we now talk about co-create, engineered, and impact. And we've been very deliberate. Now, when you look at co-create, I think the important thing there is the world is changing. Our clients are demanding more and more complex, you know, problems, solutions to their problems. And the only way you can do that is by collaborating, working with partners, working with stakeholders, co-designing with your clients. So this whole issue then of collaborating, co-creating becomes more and more important. And it's, you know, developing the trust from your clients, from your client base. The other thing is the whole thing around engineering. And here we're talking about the intentional, skillful, and really artful approach that drives us beyond traditional engineering. So, you know, we've taken our technical eminence that we've accrued over years and years. It's now grounded in digital engineering. Okay? We've now moving beyond the realms of traditional engineering. We're integrating technical and creative thinking. Across our business, we've got a number of design thinkers helping us explore problems a lot deeper. Okay? And then, you know, traditionally, we always focused on the design and construction of assets. And today, we're deliberately looking at how we connect assets to strategy. and advise our clients on how to plan, operate, and maintain and optimize and repurpose their assets. That's becoming more and more important. And then, of course, impact, creating impact for the economies, environments, and communities that we serve. And of course, it's not only impact around the economies and environments, communities, but also economic impact, the value that we're going to be giving to clients to help them stay and thrive in our business. And that's why we've been deliberate over those particular words, co-create, engineered, and impact. In terms of our capability base, that's still going to be up there. Very few companies have the base that we have, 2,000 strong, multidisciplinary employees across the continent in all of the markets that we operate in, and we'll continue to grow that. It's been able to offer really multi-skilled solutions around complex challenges to clients. And we'll be operating in the 10 markets that we have in the last couple of years, manufacturing, petrochemicals, to transport and water, our traditional infrastructure market. And look, we've had almost 100 years on the continent. We've been privileged to, work on some great projects and deliver projects of great impact to the continent. So as Zutari, we're looking forward to the next 100 years, and this is the start of a new journey. I'd ask all of you to have a look at the website, the Zutari website, and also connect with us on LinkedIn. I will also send each of you, after this session, an email just with a little bit more information, and it gives you information if you want to spend 30 seconds to 30 minutes discovering more about Zutari. But yeah, that's a change, new companies, and we're all very excited. But thanks, Harry, for the opportunity of sharing that.
Thank you, Phil. Much appreciated. What a great group, consulting engineers. We really appreciate your support and your sponsorship of the Transport Forum. I'm quite sure a lot of the panelists will contact you afterwards to learn a little bit more about Zutari. So thank you very much. Is there perhaps anybody would like to quickly ask a question to Phil on this stage? You can unmute yourself and ask a question. Okay, seems to me, Phil, they're all happy on this stage. We have a look on the chat box. I'm sure they're going to type some questions there in the chat box as well. Let me just share my screen again. All right, so thank you, Orica, now being Zutari. We're looking at freight news. I don't know if Eugene or one of them is online to say a few words about freight news. Let me give it a go. Freight news, owned by the Now Media Group, previously known as FTW, or FTW Online. They've come to know as FTW before. They've been a gold sponsor of the Transport Forum actually since the start. And this is an online news feature that gives daily updates, breaking news, insightful columns, in-depth analysis and research, video webinars, community news, and everything else that's expected from a rich multimedia site. Advertisers benefit from featuring alongside original, insightful content delivered daily by an established and trusted brand. So now, more than ever, our aim is to cover all aspects of the freight sector as we look forward to promoting the interests of our clients and the respected fields. So obviously all the sponsors, you can get the links on the website. C-Track, Eugene or Ray, or one of you guys, do you want to say a few words on C-Track?
Harry, good morning. Yes, it's Eugene speaking. Thank you very much. Again, thank you for being part of the Transport Forum. We've also been part of the Transport Forum for some time. And, we really see the benefit of this platform. And it is a privilege for us again to be part of today's session. So thank you very much, Harry.
Thank you, Eugene. In fact, you guys have been a sponsor since the start. The initiation of the Transport Forum was done together with University of Johannesburg and C-Track. So thank you very much for your support. We really appreciate that.
Thank you, Harry.
Looking forward to your presentation later on, Eugene. Railways Africa magazine, they've been a gold sponsor for 3 years about now. They say it's Africa's continent specialist trade, technical, business-to-business publication and online news service covering all aspects of the rail sector. With the current investment and future potential investment being made in rail and rail infrastructure projects, Railways Africa brings both global and local consultants, manufacturers, suppliers, and OEMs to the fore. Published weekly online and in print 6 times a year, Railways Africa is the authoritative publication for the rail industry in Africa. So thank you very much, Philippa, and your team for your sponsorship. And then we've got Cuba. Don't know, one of the guys want to say words, Chris, perhaps?
I'm not sure if Chris is on the line, but this is Donnie Goosen speaking from Cuba. Well, I haven't prepared anything, but I would like to invite everyone on this panel to please go and have a look at our website. I'll share that with Harry and make sure that it gets out to everyone. I'm not sure how many people are aware, but Cuba has acquired VIX technology on the 1st of July. So there are a lot of very, very interesting and exciting developments coming to market soon, but I'm sure we will at some stage prepare something to present at this forum. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Donnie. Really appreciate your sponsorship. You guys been a sponsor now for 3 years. We really appreciate that. And it's advanced automatic fare collection solutions. But let me not say too much. They will definitely tell us more about the company, and you can get the links on the Transport Forum website. So let me stop share here this side, and we start with Sizu and Klanaka, who's going to give us an official welcome and introduction to the Bunya Group. So Sizu, if you can unmute yourself, share your video, we'd like to hear from our host. Thank you very much.
Hi, everyone. I just want to welcome you today to today's session of the Transport Forum. Apologies on behalf of V. She's been roped into an urgent meeting, but she would have loved to be here. I think, I guess, just for the sake of time, maybe just go through in terms of what we're going to be talking about today, which will be the focus of demand planning in the public transport industry. And Harry, can you share the yes, great. Okay. So I think today's first half is going to be very much focused on the technologies surrounding transport demand management. And we're lucky to have the guys from the city of Cape Town, Mr. Ernest Sass, as well as Lee Stalworthy. I think in terms of a good example in the African context with regards to transport demand planning, Cape Town is certainly one of those guys that are way ahead of the other provinces and other regions. So it's great to have you guys, and we thank you so much for your time. We also have Dr. Mateta from the CSIR. Thank you so much for making time to come and speak to us about demand management in the public transport, as well as looking at the new era in terms of technologies and so on. And then we've got Dr. Lee Randall, who will be looking at specifically the minibus taxi industry in terms of how this industry has mastered demands for that come from many different directions pertaining to the public transport. And then we've got in the second half, we've got Mr. Eugene from C-Track, who will be looking at telemetry as well as intelligence around demand planning. And then the last presenter will be myself, and I'll be basically looking at understanding commuter patterns, which is core of public transport demand planning. So thank you so much and welcome everyone to today's forum. I hope it's going to be insightful and useful for everyone as well as for ourselves. Thank you so much, Harry.
Thank you, Sizu. Great down to you guys also for hosting the Transport Forum. They're actually hosting an event per month. So this is great working with you guys, and we learn a lot from you in terms of integrating into transport and making it work. So thank you very much, Sizu. We're looking forward to your presentation as well.
Thank you.
So back to our program. So our first presenter then is Ernest Sass and Lee Stolworthy from the Transport Directorate of City of Cape Town, and they're going to give us a perspective on transport demand management. So thank you very much, Lee, for you guys preparing, and we're looking forward to your presentation. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Harry. I'm just getting my presentation up. Okay, can you guys see this?
Yes, yes, presentation mode, then it's fine.
Okay, just bring in slideshow mode now. Harry, I didn't see Ernest on the call earlier, so I'm not sure if he's here. He was going to do the sort of the introductory part of the presentation, and then I was going to go into the more technical stuff. But if he's not here, he's probably tied up. He's a very busy man. He's probably tied up in the city at the moment with city business. So I will just start and I'll run through it. And if he joins later, then he can be part of the presentation. So thank you for the opportunity to talk from the City of Cape Town perspective on travel demand management. I prefer the term travel demand management because it doesn't always have to result in transport. So the presentation is 4 basic parts, a bit of an introduction around travel demand management and the imperative for the city and for all cities. And then some of the data that we have collected that emphasizes the need for travel demand management and why we need to intervene and what we need and where we can intervene and where the biggest challenges are in terms of what the data is revealing in the City of Cape Town. And then also to talk about the hot topic is the impact of COVID-19. But also what some of the unexpected benefits of that are from the perspective of travel demand management opportunities which are emerging, which we are trying to leverage as the City of Cape Town. And I'll share with you some of the things that we're driving with regards to that, as well as some of the considerations that we're going through now with regards to shaping a new normal from a transport demand perspective. So just as a sort of an introductory slide, the travel demand management as the city imperative, what is it that cities need to do? And how does travel demand management affect us? And I think we all know that congestion is a common characteristic of all developing and thriving cities. As long as you have multiple people living in the same place, they're going to get in each other's way. And you can't build, we know that we can't build our way out of congestion. So what we need to be thinking about it as cities is congestion management versus congestion reduction, because there will always be some level of congestion in the urban landscape. So what the cities need to do is we need to sweat our assets. We need to make sure that we are using our network space as efficiently and as effectively as possible. And so what we need to do is we need to find a balance between providing the supply for sustainable transport modes by supplying private car alternatives, by supplying more and better public transport options, but also balancing that with the demand or managing the demand for travel. So to reduce the need for people to travel in the first place. And if they do, to promote sustainable mode choices to affect those trips. And also optimizing future city growth to make sure that the demand profile, which is influenced by the spatial relationship between land uses, leads us into a better demand profile in the future. And also to change and to try and stimulate better mode choices, more sustainable mode choices and transport behavioral change. But to be able to do this, we need to understand the state of being of all of these moving parts. So we need a strong evidence base to be able to understand what we need to do and where our biggest challenges lie. Because we all know that famous saying that if you can't measure it, you can't manage it. And sort of coupled to this, what we've been doing as well is realizing that as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic and the restrictions that have been placed on movements and the adaptation that has happened as a result of that, there are benefits which we can use and we can leverage on those to try and shape a new normal. And I'll talk a little bit later on in the presentation about what we've been doing with regards to that. So getting into the evidence base, let's have a look at what Cape Town looks like pre-COVID-19 in terms of congestion and travel demand. And we've developed at the City of Cape Town a tool called the Urban Development Index, which we were set to present at SATC this year, but unfortunately that's been postponed as a result of the pandemic. And some of the slides that you will see are from the Urban Development Index, which is a set of 3 sets of indices which measure the state of transport, land use, and housing, as well as the interrelationships between them. And the intention is to calculate this periodically so that we can track the relative change of those 3 key city building elements against each other. So let's have a look at what we know. So we know the modal split in the City of Cape Town, and we've got a lot of data, and we've calculated this quite extensively. And the pie chart on the right shows what the overall citywide modal split is. And we can see that, unfortunately, the private car has got the upper hand. So private transport has a higher mode share than public transport. And in fact, we've been steadily losing ground in this, despite all of our efforts to promote public transport. But what we have now for the first time is spatially disaggregated modal split. And I'm going to put my laser pointer on here so I can show things. So on the right-hand side here, we have spatially disaggregated modal split, and these are on 5-kilometer grid cells. And the size of the pie indicates the number of trips, and the colors obviously indicate the mode share per mode. And what's interesting here is that in where we have the highest proportion of trips in the metro, where we have the highest residential densities, which is traditionally a lower income part of the city and therefore captive public transport users, what we can see is that there's a relatively high proportion of private transport. And we know that some of this is as a result of loss of rail patronage, where commuters have had to find road-based alternatives. But surprisingly, it hasn't all gone to road-based forms of public transport. And we can see that there's quite a high proportion of private car trips in the Metro Southeast part of Cape Town, which is contrary to what we believed initially. And this is what's emerging. And part of the reason for this is because we don't have enough public transport. And we can see on this is the flexibility calculation as part of the Urban Development Index. And what it indicates really in this map on the right is the level of connectedness for different parts of the city in terms of access to public transport. This is calculated on a 1-kilometer grid cell. And what it shows here is that where you are in red, it means that that's between 0 and 10% flexibility. And what flexibility is if you are 100% flexible, then you have access to 5 public transport modes within 500 meters of the centroid of that grid cell, which have a headway of less than 10 minutes. It doesn't mean that in these red areas there's no public transport, but what it means is that there's maybe less than 3 modes, and there's also public transport which has less than 10-minute headways, which gives us an indication of the supply of public transport across the metro. Where it's green, there's good coverage with high frequency, and that tends to be where we've provided BRT. This was done when the this was calculated when the Ento Express BRT service was still in operation. And on the right, it just shows beyond 500 meters, what the level of flexibility is for different parts of the city. This slide gives us an indication of the diversity of land use within the city, because we know that land use is the mother of travel demand, because people travel to get from one thing to another for a particular purpose. And we can see in the Metro Southeast where we have high residential density, so the browny orangey color is residential, and the blue is job. So we have job density versus residential density. And you can see where the predominance of the employment density is in relation to the highest density of residential. And you can see that in this particular area of the city where we had the highest number of trips in terms of the modal split, that there's very little economic opportunities here, which means that these people have to travel far to get to jobs. And that plays out in terms of the transport demand profile of the city. And even if some people wanted to live in places that were closer to economic opportunities, there isn't necessarily the housing available for them in terms of the range of housing values in the city. And this is the Housing Price Diversity Index, which is a measure of the diversity of housing price availability or housing value availability in the city. Where it's red, it's a predominance of one value. Where it's green, there is a balance of values of housing. And this gives us a good indication of how people can live in different parts of the city for different income groups. And all of this obviously has implications on the travel demand profile of the city. And these maps just show the travel distance to the top 5 destinations in the city, which we've calculated from probe data. So we know where all we've got a 4% sample of where all the trips are moving in the city and where they're originating from and where the destination is. And we were able to calculate the top 5 destinations for each 5-kilometer grid cell and use that to calculate the average travel distance. And so we can see here that the private car average travel distance is half that of the public transport trips. And as I said before, a high proportion of public transport trips emanating from here with long travel distances. So public transport trips are generally longer than private car trips in the city of Cape Town. We also know where all the congestion is in our network because we've done a congestion index as part of the Urban Development Index. So this map just shows where, for 3 different classes of road, where the speed threshold falls below a critical threshold for congestion. So for class 1 roads, for example, which are the freeways, if the speed falls below 30 kilometers an hour, we say that that's in a congested state, and we're able to plot the length of that piece of network that's in congested state. And we've done that for 3 classes of network for every 15 minutes. So we're able to understand our peak flows quite well. And we've done a lot of analysis in this as part of our congestion index. And we even know exactly what length of kilometers for each class of road is in a congested state and where the worst time period for that is, either in the morning or the evening peak. And all of that looks like this in real life. On the network, this is what it looks like. This is what it feels like. And this is a picture of typical Cape Town commute traffic pre-COVID-19 and pre-lockdown, where you can see this is the N2 inbound towards the city center in the morning, typical morning peak hour. And you can see a lot of cars. You can see the MyCity BRT bus operating in the lane there. And what's interesting to note about this is that we know from the congestion work that we've done and a lot of the data that we've collected that 80% of all of the private transport vehicles in the network only have 1 person in them. They're 80% single occupancy vehicles. So if you take all of these cars that are in the shaded area here and you took all of the people out of them, they would all fit in this 1 bus. So imagine what this picture would look like if you just had no cars and 2 buses. It would be quite significantly different in terms of how we can use the road space that we have available to us. Interestingly, in this picture though as well, it's very typical of Cape Town and other South African cities as well, which have similar land use profiles that we have, is that there's not much happening in the opposite direction. And that's because this directional imbalance is a result of the spatial inefficiencies between trip producing and trip attracting land uses. In other words, where is the economic job densities in relation to the residential densities? And this can't be solved by a transport solution. This is a long-term approach to optimizing the spatial relationships between land use. And what you can see here is that, and I mentioned before the difference between the private transport and the public transport. And this is the bar chart on the top here, just shows the difference in travel time. The average travel time for the car is 21 minutes versus public transport in Cape Town is 48 minutes. And that doesn't mean that public transport or road-based public transport is necessarily much slower than the private car. But what it means is that it's as a result of the fact that they're traveling significantly more differences in proportion. And you can see that from this bar chart at the bottom here. So then from a policy perspective, so we understand that we're starting to understand this relationship and these relationships, and this data is emerging the more we analyze and the more we collect and the more we develop these indices. So we've developed some policy perspective on trying to resolve some of these issues. And we have the Travel Demand Management Strategic Strategy, which was approved by the city in 2017, which has a range of implementation actions around addressing some of the travel demand management challenges that we have in the city. We're developing a congestion management plan now, which is in its final draft stage at the moment, which looks at 3 key focus areas on congestion management, relating to infrastructure, which is not building more and more roads for more and more cars, but it's about providing critical missing links in the network to unlock parts of the city. And it also looks at providing operational inefficiencies. So how do we squeeze as much capacity out of the existing network that we have? As well as behavioral change. How do we use the things that are coming out of the travel demand management strategy in terms of behavioral change and leverage that into our congestion management plan? So then COVID-19 happened. So that was the state of transport in Cape Town pre-COVID-19. And then COVID-19 happened, and we realized that the situation has changed. And we went from this picture on the left, which is actually the cover picture from our travel demand management strategy, of the approach to Hospital Bend. If anybody knows Cape Town very well, you'll know that in the afternoon peak, trying to get out of the city center, this is what you're faced with this congestion. And then COVID-19 happened, and then this is a picture from the freeway management system during level 5 lockdown on the other side of the hill coming down Hospital Bend. And you can see that suddenly there's a massive amount of tarmac that is available. And so we realize that there's opportunities here to try and shape the new normal. So how do we think about this space now going forward with reduced travel demand on it? And what should we do about that? So we've set about developing a set of interventions which identifies implementable actions which can be undertaken by various people, the city, not just transport, but other directorates, as well as external stakeholders, to try and shape a new normal, to try and think about how to use this space in a different way. And we're at the stage where we finalized that set of interventions. Now we're about to go to council with that plan, but we know that we have to do this quickly. So we need to separate these things into things that we can do quickly, as well as things that we can do in the long term, because we have a very small window of opportunity to achieve something meaningful because of this acceleration and adaptation that has happened as a result of COVID-19. But there are some challenges with regards to that as well. And we know that on the 4th of May, 2020, that the National Department of Transport issued a directive with regards to some restrictions on capacity for public transport in terms of social distancing requirements within the public transport realm. And the result of that is that the capacity of public transport was reduced to 60% of normal capacity. We know that that's changed now because the rules have changed and that there's 100% capacity available now for public transport, for road-based public transport, but I believe that rail is still restricted to 70%. And we received those directives yesterday. And what I'm going to show you now is related to the directive of the 4th of May, which we need to recalculate. But it's useful to make the point that it's a key consideration, because even if public transport is now able to carry 100% of people, will there be 100% take-up with fears of social distancing on public transport, etc. But the exercise that we've undertook as part of this has taught us some valuable lessons. So what we've done is we've said, okay, if we were to apply these capacity restrictions to public transport, and if we look at the various sectors of the economy and how they are set to open up during different levels of lockdown, we're able to estimate the numbers of people. Well, we know how many people are employed in each sector from employment surveys in the city of Cape Town, and we're able to calculate what the modal split or the mode choice is likely to be for public transport, and we're able to quantify that for different sectors of the economy in terms of the numbers of people that are employed in those sectors. And then using this together with the different levels of lockdown and how the different sectors of the economy will be likely to be opening up during different levels of the lockdown, we're able to calculate the public transport trips that will come, that will start to emerge as a result of easing of levels of lockdown. And we're able to use that to calculate based on the restrictions to public transport, will we be able to meet the demand for public transport with the lockdown restrictions that are applied to them? This has changed now because the restrictions on public transport have changed. But what this exercise showed us is that in terms of the capacity of public transport that's available, which is these bars at the bottom here, and in relation to the demand for public transport at different levels of lockdown, we wouldn't be able to meet the demand for public transport in terms of the availability of capacity. And the only way to address that is to lower or flatten the curve in terms of travel demand, which made us think very carefully about how we can apply travel demand management mechanisms to different sectors of the economy to try and lower the demand curve for public transport. And so we know that things have already changed significantly. Many of us are working from home now. Roughly, we think about a third in the city of Cape Town, because our transport as sectors of the economy have opened up has only increased to about 60% or slightly more than that. And these are just some of the pictures of the pros and cons of working from home, which I'm sure all of us have experienced at some point. And so with this opportunity in mind, we've started to talk to a lot of people to try and identify some quick interventions that we can do to try and maintain these benefits, because I'm sure all of you will agree that it's much better to sit here in the comfort of our homes and attend these kinds of sessions and webinars without having to get on a plane and travel somewhere and stay in a hotel. Because this is the kind of normal that we want. And we're starting to talk to a lot of people around how we can intervene in this space. We don't have time now to go and do big feasibility studies to try and identify things that we can do to enable maintaining these benefits of lockdown. There's a lot of knowledge, a lot of experience inherent in the city, not just in our directorate, but outside of our directorate, as well as the private sector, NGOs, cycling activist groups, as well as our colleagues in the province, etc. So we've engaged with many people. We've had 22 online sessions with multiple people in each one, and we've engaged with people like the Pedal Power Association. We've used the Open Streets, our relationship with them and their platform of the street minds, to be able to engage with multiple stakeholders to identify hyper-local opportunities to try and leverage the benefits of this lockdown in terms of travel demand management, as well as working with our colleagues in the province and through the Premier's office. There's a big drive there as well to try and do this. And we're going to be engaging with large employees in the city next week through the Cape Chamber, through a facilitated conversation with them, to see how the city can help big businesses in terms of flexible working programs, etc. And so we've used this as a mechanism to quickly identify sets of travel demand management mechanisms to lock in these benefits post-lockdown in 5 broad categories. So in terms of the transport network, we've identified measures that we can do to try and intervene in the network space in terms of tactical urbanism, reallocation of space to more sustainable uses. A good example is the provision of a bus minibus taxi lane on Hospital Bend. We can do that right now because the space is available, because the take-up rate of transport is not back to 100% yet. And we want to put these kind of things in place before it gets there to shape the new normal. We're considering transport infrastructure interventions in terms of priority road-based public transport to give speed advantages to public transport, which is operating in mixed traffic. We need to beef up the provision of bike facilities and parking at urban centers to create and enable the, active cycling and a higher mode share for NMT in the mix. We're also looking at transport operations in terms of ride sharing, and also that looks at reallocation of space in terms of parking at city buildings, etc. Institutional wide interventions. As a result of the travel demand management strategy, which was approved in 2017, the City of Cape Town has adopted a flexible working program in 2018 by directive of the city manager. And the city has been working on expanding the flexible working program. And that luckily has been accelerated as a result of the lockdown, because we have to work from home, we have to work flexibly. And we've been working very closely with our colleagues in the human resources departments, as well as the IT departments to make sure that we have the right enabling infrastructure and HR processes to enable employees to work effectively from home and work effectively remotely. We've also been working with external partners in terms of what we can do external to normal city functions to try and leverage interventions in the external space. And I mentioned engagements which are coming up with the Cape Chamber and large employers next week. And so what we've done is we've packaged these sets of interventions, focusing on the quick wins, the things that we can do without big infrastructure, the things that we can do. Sometimes all you need is paint and signs, and we can make some quick interventions to try and lock in these benefits. And we're set to go back to our executive management team next week with these sets of interventions for support. We've presented the initiative to them before. We've got great support from the city manager and the executive management team, also from our mayoral committee member, Felicity Purchase, and our portfolio chair for transport, large support from them, as well as from the Premier's office in the province. So we want to maximize the benefit of this window of opportunity that we have to make some substantive changes to our network and the way that transport operates in the city of Cape Town. And so last slide, and I've been rushing through this because I know I only have 25 minutes, but I just wanted to leave you with some thoughts on things that also are happening, the things that we need to think about in terms of travel demand management in the city of Cape Town and other cities, not just in South Africa, but also globally. And in a webinar that I attended recently for the Urban Lands Institute, that many of these things were discussed there as well with other cities. So if people are traveling less now, out of necessity because of restrictions and lockdown, but what we want to do is we want to make it preferable and possible for people to travel less. And so these are some of the things that we try to enable through our interventions in travel demand management. And we know that some of these things have multiplier effect, although they may seem to be mutually exclusive. They're all adding to the travel demand management benefits. So we've seen an acceleration in online shopping and the emergence of the fourth industrial revolution capabilities, which enables the taking of stuff to people rather than the taking of people to stuff. Because, and the benefit of that from a travel demand management perspective is that it's easier to optimize the movements of stuff than it is to optimize the movements of people. Because the donuts don't mind that you drop the cake off first and that you've picked up the laptop along the way. So it's easier to optimize stuff than to optimize the movements of people. So in the future, will people only travel because they want to travel, not because they have to travel? And if they do, how far will they go? And what modes will they use to get there? These are some of the things that we need to start to think about. And so the old notion of the origin-destination relationship is fundamentally shifted now because trip purpose has changed, because where we live and where we work now is kind of the same place. So traditionally, we'd spent a lot of time and energy thinking about the urban landscape at the so-called destination end of the commute trip, in other words, the work environment. And we didn't do much in terms of land use around the residential areas because that's just where you sleep, right? But it's not anymore because you work and sleep in the same place. So what does that mean for things like land use diversity in traditional residential areas? What does it mean for the urban landscape in traditional employment nodes and the use of space and the use of buildings? You know, how much office space is available now? What can we do with that? What do we repurpose that for? And how do we build these parts, these various parts, into a virtuous cycle of travel demand management? And I think I'm just going to leave it there, but those are some of the things that we're thinking about at the City of Cape Town. And I'm already talking extensively with my land use colleagues around some of these issues and how we can take them into future considerations in terms of managing city growth. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Lee. What an excellent presentation. I think, yeah, donuts are important. I would love my donut to be there soonest, but I'll take you on that one. Lee, no, thank you very much. And I think the process you guys are busy with and shaping a new normal is very interesting, and surely we're learning a lot, you know, so we really appreciate that. You know, the new way of thinking of bringing goods to people rather than taking the people to the goods. Yeah, that's a complete new way of thinking. So thank you for sharing this with us. And I'm quite sure the audience is looking forward to engage with you during the panel discussion. So thank you. Thanks a lot, Lee. We really appreciate your time. Ladies and gents, our next presenter then will be Dr. Mateta Mokanyama. He's Competence Area Manager, Transport Systems and Operations at the CSIR, but we know that he's also taking up other positions. He's a very capable and knowledgeable person. He's also very involved at PRASA. So Dr. Mokanyama, thank you very much for agreeing to present at the Transport Forum again. And he's going to talk about demand management and public transport, a new era. So thank you very much, Mateta.
All right, thanks, Harry, and good morning, colleagues, wherever you are in China, in the United States, in South Africa. We live in exciting times. The presentation is, I've beamed it there. It's, I hope you can see. Is it? Can you see it?
No, not yet, Mateta. So it's share screen at the bottom of your screen. A blue, sorry, green share screen option. There we go.
All right. So you can see. All right.
Right. Yes, we can see it.
All right. The presentation is really food for thought around, you know, demand management in public transport and issues relating to the new era. Requested to touch on that in particular. I think the key questions that I attempt to answer in the presentation is, what should we know more about changes in travel demand, and how should we be responding to such changes from a management perspective? And I look particularly at, you know, policy level, planning, design, and operations levels. All right. I think a departure point is to appreciate that, you know, demand in public transport, in mobility generally, is got a lot of variables. You know, everything is a variable. The purpose why you travel, it is a variable, it changes. The departure time is a variable, it can change on a daily basis. Arrival time is also a variable. The modes that you use are a variable. The destination, the place of residence is a variable. You know, the waypoints or the path, you know, the date, and there are many variables in this. And they're affected by such things as, you know, the perceptions, you know, what the individuals learn, what will it cost me in terms of safety, time, you know, what do I know about this, perceptions about the word of mouth. So what this means is that the simplistic way of representing reality is being challenged more and more. And we need to move more to understanding the system better. And we have previously, and we're working on, you know, concepts, you know, the system dynamics modeling, for example. It has shown that it can represent some of the reality better, although it is difficult to code, to represent. But then also with together with the University of Pretoria, we began to look at how we can look at the aggregate models. How can we introduce such variability in the aggregate model? So essentially a model that assumes that a specific area, a suburb, for example, will behave in a certain way, or a group of people in a suburb will behave in a certain way. How can you improve variability in such aggregate models? So more and more going into the future, we will be required to challenge ourselves in terms of how we model demand, and it requires us to represent variability, improve how we represent variability. And you know, books like this one, Future of Everything, there are some things that we note there. I mean, things like, you know, the money that is sitting in corporates, these large corporates, estimated, for example, $12 trillion cash reserves just waiting to be invested. So that represents an opportunity, but that also can be a hindrance, because depending on who pitches best, that money will go there. And currently what we're seeing is that the electrification of cars is getting more and more traction, so the monies are going there. So we need to be aware of some of these trends so that we're able to influence where the money goes. Things like, you know, the as a service, mobility as a service, software as a service, and many other things as a service. They are gaining popularity. You know, the cities are growing, and there's indication that they will plateau to 25 million. So can you imagine city of Johannesburg, 25 million people? Can you imagine the city of Cape Town, 25 million? What changes then? What is it that we're doing now to prepare for that kind of demand? But also in this book, interestingly, South Africa is highlighted as a country that is lagging behind. It's likely to still lag behind a bit, battling such things as high unemployment in young Black communities, you know, dominance, racial dominance, white in business leadership, wealth disparities, you know, city violence, gated communities. So those things we cannot ignore. And whatever we design, what we design, we need to take those into account because they influence demand, you know, going forward. Concepts like mass, mobility as a service. It's interesting that it was a civil engineer, and I'm, you know, proud that he's a civil engineer who came up with this concept around, you know, 2006. It has since gained some traction. But what you learn out of this trajectory in Finland, for example, is that it has taken time. It has taken time to develop, to gain traction, but where it has worked, such concepts have worked, that's where there is a conducive environment. There's room to experiment a little bit more. But what I see in South Africa is that we have a tendency to be very impatient. You know, we hear about something, we want it implemented tomorrow, and if it doesn't work, we abandon it, and then we get on to the next new thing. So we don't get to, you know, give things a chance to work as they should. And then just touching on the policy level, what is it that are some of the notables from a demand management perspective? The reason why we're doing all of this is their goals. You know, individually, people want to you know, improve their convenience individually, comfort, you know, safety. At a system level, you want to improve reliability, you know, optimal capacity utilization. You want less of, you know, travel costs as an individual, you know, travel time, you know, things like transfers and other system things, indicators, total vehicle kilometers. Often some of these things can be, you know, conflicting. So we need to manage that balance. Something we need to also note at a policy level is that, especially legislation, regulation level, is that regulation, if you know, enforced, can definitely make an impact, can change. We've seen, this is a picture that emerged out of that, the Google Mobility Report for South Africa is there for other countries. It shows the presence of people in around public transport, what could be considered public transport, you know, facilities, relative to what happened between 3 and 6 January. So the baseline is 3 to 6 January, and what changed, what has changed relative to that period. And you see that the demand across the board in all provinces, South Africa, has gone down, you know, quite significantly, because there was enforcement, but then over time things, you know, became a bit more variable. But things haven't you know, picked up to what things used to be previously, even around July. But the point here is that enforced, you know, demand can certainly be influenced. But also, while you're influencing, you need to have, you know, some balancing acts. You know, there's budgets that are limited. There's increasing demand. There's increased need for individualism. Inequalities, what works for some may not necessarily work for others, but then also human rights. So you enforce, but you need to take into account rights. You influence, and, you know, to what extent can you resource the influence that you, so there's the need for balancing acts. And you know, the old argument of liberty versus ecological sustainability, more and more at a policy level, we need to be cognizant that there is a need to balance ecological sustainability on the one side with liberty. For example, you know, cases like this mobility as a service, it's been shown that the number of kilometers, vehicle kilometers, can increase quite significantly. So because, you know, there's a bit more liberty, the automation of vehicles, it has been shown that it can increase vehicle. So at a system level, sustainability can be compromised. So while we adopt, we need to balance, you know, the things a little bit, and take into account the well-being of course, future generations. And then at a policy level again, there's also growing demand or growing movement advocating for improved methods measuring progress and impact. How do you measure progress? How do you measure impact? And the interesting thing is how public transport needs to be now valued as an asset, not just in accounting terms, as in I have so many buses, I have so many tires, I have so much fuel, this is my inventory, but what is the value? What is the value, the intrinsic value of that, service? So we're seeing that movement going, gaining traction, momentum. So we need to embrace more of that in the metrics at a policy level. And then at a planning level, we did some work some time ago to look at what elasticities you get. Elasticities that you get from different, interventions, and I'll explain it. So elasticity is essentially how much percentage change do you get out of 1% intervention. For example, 1% change in vehicle travel time, car travel time. How does it, change the demand for car travel? For example, in this case, 1% change in increased travel time reduces the demand for car travel by 0.27. The minus is, the opposite direction, 0.27. The increased cost of car reduces the demand by 0.29%. And this is different studies compiled, but what of significance is public transport. What you begin seeing is that the moment in-vehicle travel time increases, the drop in demand changes quite drastically. The cost changes, the demand changes quite drastically. But of course, some of the studies are taken in areas where individuals have a choice. But the point is that what tends to happen is that the poor quality in public transport tends to create losses very quickly than, for example, in car, ride-sharing, services. But then also we see that things like costs of, increased costs definitely does improve or change behavior quite significantly relative to other things. Things like land use, density, land use diversity, those are also very significant. Elsewhere, they have been shown to be significant, but of significance is that the service quality does impact on demand. So improving skill levels at operations level. I mean, you can have very good things, policies on paper, but if they're not implemented well at an operations level, you're not going to get that service quality. I remember we dealing with some scheduler in one of the cities that I will not mention. It's a gentleman who's been there for 40 years. He swore by his paper schedules on boards all over. And we converted that schedule into some routine algorithm spreadsheet, basic spreadsheet. And he said, I will not use it. Skills at that operations level, very, they're needed. They need to be reskilled so that, service quality is improved. And we also noted from the data through harvesting of data, and I see the City of Cape Town does that through harvesting of data, through satellite imagery. We did work to look at how the built environment has changed. This is in the city of Johannesburg in particular. So from 1990 to 2009, how things have changed. And the message coming out is that where things change is essentially around what we typically call periphery. So more and more with all the policies that we've put together, with all these urban edges that have been put in place, the economy is still buying more and more from peripheral long distance travel. The picture at the bottom is Vodacom this year, having looked at how many people, proportion of people at the ward level travel more than 10 kilometers, and this is Gauteng province. And you can see, you know, the economy still buys a lot from the periphery, what you typically call peripheral development, despite all the policies that we've had. So there needs to be change. We need to learn something. And also what you also observe, the networks that were built, you know, the roads, the rail networks and so forth, they were built with certain, you know, concepts of living in mind. The picture to the top there is car ownership forecasts in the city of Johannesburg relative to income, done sometime in 1988, so that you can then design networks. It was shown using racial categories that the probability of Black people owning a car, it will saturate at 30%, and then white 90%. But we know that it's not just about race. There's a lot more to it. And some work that we did later on showed that, you know, in areas like Sandton, with increased prosperity, the level of, you know, car ownership, car use will not change as much as, for example, Soweto. And we've seen that. We see the evidence of that in areas, in townships. Saturday, Soweto, the place is chock-a-block. So we need more nuanced understanding of how things work at an operational level. Design level, you know, I'm still stunned by some of these findings. The work done some time ago by Professor Del Mistro, Professor Behrens presented, you know, a while ago around the variability of demand of traffic, and the finding that less than 50% of motorists repeat their travel patterns on the next day or the next week. I mean, put simply, says people who you see today on a road section, an arterial road, they are replaced by another half. So it means at best the models that are being used to design and you know our cities, our networks, are at best 50% accurate. But often what you see in these design reports is that this forecast will be saying, you know, we've got 199% or 90% correlation, and therefore, you know, we then recommend certain interventions to be made. So improved understanding of what is really happening in the demand definitely will help. And then another thing, traffic engineers, they will tell you the relationship between speed, density, and flow. You know, as density, number of vehicles per kilometer increases, of course, the speed reduces. You know, how many vehicles per kilometer it reduces. As density increases, the flow increases, number of vehicles, you know, per hour. It will increase up to a point, and then of course, it drops. And then similarly with the speed and flow. So often they say, okay, if you want to improve this, then you need to reduce the density, increase the number of lanes, for example, without saying why. Why is this happening? Why are we having what we're having? And similarly with the models that we have, the relationship between volume to capacity and the delay on the network. The question of why is it that we're having the kind of observations that we're having on the network. But very significant is that traffic engineers would tend to influence huge budgets in cities, the built environment, but the question of why is often not asked by the traffic engineers. So we need to do that a lot more. And designing with the future in mind, we definitely have to do that. In this book, The Future of Access, the concepts like electrification, demassification, automation, and so forth, they need to find their way into our designs. If you have a design right now, what questions are you asking about connectivity? What questions are you asking about dematerialization? What questions are you asking about pricing? If you're not asking these questions, chances are you are not really responding to the what we need to learn. about changes in demand on the ground. At operations level, in this book, the Fourth Industrial Revolution, a popular book, I mean, things like, within 2020, by 2025, observations, but 1 trillion sensors will be connected to the internet. First 3D printed car, the first government to replace its sensors with big data sources. Driverless cars equaling 10% on US roads. Global, more trips per trips or journeys via car sharing than in private cars, predicted as 67% probability. The interesting also, the first city with more than 50,000 people and no traffic lights. So forecasts are saying in the next 5 years, this change will definitely happen. So we need to embrace it at an operations level. And where change is embraced, things, the implementation of MaaS, this mobility as a service concepts, entities like WIM and Ubigo, we note that they tend to be small in size, pilot size, and the interesting thing is after participating, participants then alter their behavior. So what it means is that you may need to introduce things you need to provide experience, learned experience, so that change becomes visible. So you cannot just have this big bang thing. You need to have a group of people, expose them to change, and then once they see there's some benefit to it, some of them will then adopt that change. So at an operations level, we need to experiment more and more. And what we see, of course, is that with the surveys that have been carried out in South Africa, household surveys, is that mode share, the public transport, trains, buses, it's lower capacity modes, the train, taxi, cars, that are gaining more and more patronage. They're absorbing more demand. So essentially, this is fertile ground for those concepts, individualized mobility services. But of course, it must not be at the expense of sustainability. We know this is happening, so there is some fertile ground for such innovations, but it cannot be at the expense of sustainability. So in terms of the way forward, last slide, at the policy level, of course, we need to be outcomes-based legislation, as opposed to saying, follow this path. More and more outcomes-based policy. Planning level, data harvesting, we've seen, of course, you can do quite a lot with data harvesting, but very important is you must have proper definition of what is being harvested. We've seen data scientists, computer scientists who just, publish data, and then misinterpret what it is saying. So you need, domain expertise to still guide that process. And of course, strong feedback loops at a planning level. You need to have a learning planning system. At a design level, quite a lot of change in terms of interoperability of designs, understanding the user better in the designs, but also important concepts such as trust. They tend to be qualitative, but they have a very significant impact. I mean, you've seen the elasticity of change. And a lot of that, when you go into, some of the research, qualitative, investigations, they provide you with better insights of what is happening, what is the underlying causes of what is happening. So concepts like trust, perceptions, and so they are strong drivers of change. So in a transport plan of the city of Cape Town, city of Johannesburg, eThekwini, for example, you want to ask, what have you done in terms of understanding, doing qualitative surveys to understand demand better, so that your designs are not based on this brushed, assumptions of saying we'll do this and then we will get this output. And then, of course, connectivity between users and infrastructure. Those concepts we need to embed, early on in our designs. At an operations level, incremental experience, we've seen experience-based interventions, do definitely help information to users. It does help. And of course, as I mentioned earlier, training, reskilling and skilling at the operations level to improve quality of services definitely does influence the shape or the changes in demand. And then lastly, but not least, decisive investment in research and innovation. Wanting to get results without investing in research and innovation, is taking us backward. We need to be decisive in this, equip universities, equip research institutions, so that they're able to inform, the way forward in planning, policy, design, and operations. With that, Chairperson Harry, I hope there's some food for thought for discussions. Thanks.
Mateta, indeed, lots of food for thought, but many years ago when I was a young student, we learned a lot about as they said those days, the learning organization. And it was a quite interesting concept. So what you learned us today, learning planning system, is so important. And thank you for sharing this with us, and I like the challenge you posed to the traffic engineers to get back to the drawing boards. That was quite the interesting one as well. But what I also appreciate is what you said, that public transport, should be valued as an asset in our community. I would like to believe the Transport Forum became an asset in the industry today, but that should contribute in having public transport as an asset. And we should value that as citizens, and I think the delegates will agree with me in this regard. So thank you very much for sharing your knowledge with us. And you just told me that you will be able to participate in a panel discussion, so thank you for that. And I'm sure the people will have some questions for you during the panel discussion. While I'm saying that, I'm encouraging the people to start putting questions in the chat room, and the people following on YouTube, there's quite a number of people on YouTube. You're welcome to text questions on YouTube as well. And during the panel discussion shortly, we will then start addressing those. So I just want to put up our program again. So our next presenter then is Dr. Lee Randall. She's an occupational therapist, and she's a founder of the Roads Ethics Project, done a lot of research in this industry, and she's going to talk about a very interesting topic, the minibus taxi industry, master of many demands. So Dr. Lee, thank you very much. We're looking forward to your presentation.
Thanks, Harry. Let me just share my screen. Oops. That one. Okay, is that up and visible, Harry?
Up and visible, thank you very much.
Okay, great, thank you. So I know this question will have arisen in some people's minds, so I thought let me deal with it up front. What on earth is an occupational therapist doing in the transport sector? Well, the connection might be a bit oblique, but let me just explain. We, as experts on occupational participation, we also look at the factors that enable that participation, and transport is a key factor enabling occupations. It also intersects very directly with the health and rehabilitation sector when it comes to road crashes, injuries, and disabilities. And in particular, high occupancy, high injury transport modes merit attention because of their public health and bioethical considerations, because of the high human and economic costs of crashes. So what piqued my attention was the moral outrage that is often directed at taxi drivers, as if they are hugely responsible for our very sobering road safety statistics in South Africa. And I embarked on PhD research, and I explored the legitimacy of this moral outrage in my PhD thesis, Coffins on Wheels, a bioethical study of work conditions, driver behavior, and road safety in the Joburg minibus taxi industry. So my focus is somewhat Gauteng specific, but obviously in the process of getting to grips with my topic, I needed to look more broadly. So I thought I'd like to just place my presentation today in a particular context. And Antonio Guterres from the UN gave the 18th Nelson Mandela annual lecture on Saturday. It was the first time the lecture had been given virtually. And one particular thing he said really jumped out at me when he said COVID-19 has been likened to an X-ray, revealing fractures in the fragile skeleton of the societies we have built. It's exposing fallacies and falsehoods everywhere. The myth that we are all in the same boat. Because while we are all floating on the same sea, it's clear that some are in super yachts, while others are clinging to the floating debris. Now, his analogy is very much about maritime realities, and what we're dealing with today is land transport realities. But I think it's a very apt concept to bear in mind as we look at TDM. So my brief agenda today is to look from a slightly different angle at why bother with transportation demand management, or I in fact prefer to call it mobilities management, dealing with people who use wheelchairs as their form of mobility and many people who don't use transport in the classical sense of the word. We still need to be conscious of how all people move around. Then I'm going to put forward my argument as to why I say the minibus taxi industry is and has been a master of many demands. And I'm going to couch all of this against some ethical considerations, in particular, how the minibus taxi industry can help challenge the automobility regime or the culture of the car. And it could help reduce the post-COVID car apocalypse that people are beginning to speak about. But of course, it faces its own distinct survival challenges, both during and after the pandemic. So just to start off with a few concepts of TDM, and I'm going to tweak them in a particular way. TDM obviously promotes greater movement efficiencies. It helps redistribute demand in space or time, for instance, from single occupancy vehicles to high occupancy vehicles. But it also enhances community life, reduces cost burden for individuals, helps create thriving city economies, helps ensure better environmental outcomes. And then here comes the tweak coming from the health sector. It definitely can improve public health on a number of different levels. And from the bioethics or ethical sector, it can bring about greater distributive justice in relation to scarce resources. And one of those scarce resources is obviously road space, and another one is people's time. Just a point, telecommuting and non-motorized transport must also come into TDM, which in many ways has been very oriented to motorized transport. And the COVID pandemic is really helping clarify that we need to be very holistic in thinking about TDM. So it levels the playing field when it takes into account the needs of all community members. And in that way, TDM can actually promote social harmony. So coming to the minibus taxi industry as a master of many demands, the book I'm showing on the right is by Colleen McCall, who really produced the first formal study of the industry back in 1990. But the industry itself dates back to the 70s, initially using sedan cars, large sedan cars, and then moving over to minibus taxis. And it arose purely in response to commuter demands as shaped by the apartheid realities that were facing Black South Africans. So it met the derived demand, which was created by the reality of people living in dormitory townships and working in distant commercial and industrial areas. Black commuters eagerly consumed the early minibus taxi services because they offered a better, cheaper, and more user-friendly option rather than the state-run bus services. Also, the industry allowed for some defiance against the government of the day. It challenged the state's monopoly over Black people's lives and movements, and its denial of their ability to be business people in their own right. Very briefly, as I see it, there were three distinct periods in the evolution of the industry. So it was born as a pirate industry and remained a pirate industry for a long time. And one can see the vestiges of the pirate mentality still in the industry very prominently today. Then the late 1980s to the mid 1990s, I call the free-for-all era, where there was regulation, then deregulation, then a return of some regulation, which was defied. And from 1996 onwards, so virtually coinciding with the birth of democratic South Africa, I call the era that we are currently in the dancing with the state era. And I'm going to come back to that a little bit later. But what's very clear is that throughout these three eras, these three periods, the industry has been what Fobosi calls the servant of the urban poor. I think I'm going to skip over this slide. This is just two contrary arguments regarding regulation being undesirable on the one hand, desirable on the other hand. And I think this is peripheral to what we need to be dealing with today, but it will be available in the presentation if you want to download it. The fact of the matter is there's been exponential growth in the industry over its roughly 3 or 4 decades. So Colleen McCall in 1990 estimated the number of taxis circulating around South Africa at 60,000. Current estimates, and I say estimates because we don't have an exact count, is over 300,000 taxis. Over the same sort of time frame, we've gone from about 500,000 passengers using them to 15 million plus passengers using them. We've gone from perhaps 300,000 jobs directly or indirectly connected to the industry to a much more significant number of jobs. And I would argue that it's probably higher than the 600,000, which are shown here. Once you take into account the rank mamas, the hawkers, and the other peripheral jobs like car washers. The fact is that around South Africa, minibus taxis carry up to 70% of South African commuters. And I was interested in the Cape Town figure being more like 21%. In Gauteng, it's certainly in the 60 to 70% range and possibly greater. Now, over its lifespan so far, the industry has proven itself to be agile, affordable, flexible, broadly speaking, acceptable, ubiquitous, tenacious, and even aspirational. But of course, this has required the owners, the operators, the associations, and the mother bodies to meet numerous different demands, ranging from the business ownership, vehicle ownership demands, to the regulatory demand. I put that in inverted commas. I don't only mean state regulation, I mean also the internal regulations by which the industry operates. The customer-based demands, and then also transport flow realities. And Lee Stolworthy did talk about the unidirectional flow, which is a South African reality, and it leaves the operators with dead miles where the vehicle is moving, but no fares have come in. The industry also offers many advantages, and I'm just going to mention a few that we in the health sector are particularly aware of. Taxis, often in the lull time between the peak hours, they may provide special taxi or door-to-door services for sick and disabled people. They also may serve as for-hire transport vehicles for funerals, church events, and other events. What many people in the suburbs don't know is that some taxis offer bespoke services such as grocery deliveries, where your Pick and Pay online shopping and your Woolies home deliveries certainly don't penetrate. They're also interchangeable. They have short distance and long distance interchangeability. And I think we see that particularly in the festive seasons, or what I call the crash seasons, where short distance operators may deviate into some long distance operations. And even the skoro-koros in the backyards get pressed into service in response to the heightened demand. The other thing about the taxi industry is that it possesses deep, hyper-local route knowledge. It also fills a lot of gaps in the sector, including scholar transport gaps, and to a huge extent, it absorbs unskilled labor. And I have argued that not only do we have the regular drivers, but we have a shadow cohort of drivers willing and able to be pressed into action, such as during the high demand periods, but also when a regular driver is sick or otherwise unable to drive. But the industry is not without its problems. From a commuter perspective, the 2014 Gauteng household travel survey, for instance, showed that 44% of minibus taxi users were dissatisfied in relation to crashes and safety in the industry. 46% were dissatisfied with the behavior of taxi drivers, and 45% were dissatisfied with taxi roadworthiness. So it's a two-way street, and many of the drivers that I worked with during my PhD research talked about the stress associated with carrying commuters and dissatisfied commuters. 20% said a big source of their stress comes from passengers. Another 34% said some stress comes from passengers. And in fact, this as a source of stress ranked fourth on the list, with other road users being first, taxi association officials being second, traffic cops being third, and taxi owners even falling beneath passengers in terms of being a source of stress to the drivers. The passengers are also, in the drivers' perceptions, somewhat responsible for road crashes, for instance, with their demands to stop anywhere, anytime, and sometimes exhortations to the driver to speed up, get in the yellow lane, the emergency lane, get me to work on time or get me home on time. So the drivers do face great pressures in terms of meeting consumer demands. And now there's significant new concerns. Now the image on the right, I'm afraid I can't attribute it to anyone. It came to me on WhatsApp via all sorts of routes, and it's very tongue-in-cheek. But I think it does sum up somewhat of public sentiment at the moment that, you know, is our government endorsing that the taxi industry becomes a traveling epicenter, a traveling super spreader of the COVID pandemic. So despite reeling from its own economic losses during the lockdown and right up to the present, the industry is actually now being expected to be a key custodian of public health in the face of what's a raging pandemic and also, I might say, a raging economic crisis. You may have seen the cartoon that appeared in Business Maverick earlier this month. And, you know, a lot of people feel that, excuse my language, that the taxi industry has government by the balls, but we could also look in the reverse direction and say what is going on with regulations and with the realities of the pandemic has the taxi industry by the balls. Just a few headlines out of the many that have appeared recently. There is an infection risk, there's no doubt about it. And our regulations treat up to 200 kilometers as a short trip. But from an epidemiological point of view, 200 kilometers is a disastrously long trip, because even if the entire 200 kilometers is done at 120 kilometers per hour, which is highly unlikely, that is way, way longer than the 10, 15 or 20 minutes that science shows is sufficient for cross-infection. And for the drivers in particular, the 100% loading, which has now been brought in, is a great double edge. It hugely ups their exposure, but of course, it also potentially ups the chances of economic survival and reduces the chances of job loss. The Colleges of Medicine of South Africa recently and rarely produced a press release which talks about the clear evidence for restrictions on public transport. And of course, this was kind of overridden when government allowed for 100% loading in short distance taxis. So the issues raised by the College of Medicine include ventilation. Now, immediately my thought is the passengers determine that as much as the drivers. I can see passengers saying, it's cold, close the windows, And if there are window blockers in place that have cost the industry something to install, I can foresee that in some situations, passengers will simply sabotage those. So how do we deal with the fact that WHO, the World Health Organization, is very clearly saying that cross-infection risks have a great deal to do with dose, dispersion, and distance. Dose being related to how many people are breathing into a space and how many are emitting virus, and to what extent are things like masks reducing that. Dispersion relating to ventilation, and how realistic is that in something like a moving taxi. And distance, obviously relating to physical distance. Now, yesterday I was driving along and saw a taxi that had clearly used the so-called 4x4, 5x5 principle. 4x4 being an exhortation to passengers to please pack 4 of you onto a seat designed for 3, and 5x5 similarly, a mechanism to convey, guys, we need to overload the vehicle. So how can an unsubsidized industry continue meeting its demands while at the same time trying to balance the science of saving lives and the economics of saving livelihoods? COVID-19 is clearly a game changer. And just to go back to the words of the UN Secretary General, when looking at TDM in South Africa now and going forward, we need to try to make sure it doesn't continue to be a case of our roads floating both super yachts and debris. South Africa needs ongoing conversations around TDM, but in the broadest sense. For instance, we need to promote transport equity. We need to improve access to safe and decent modes of transport, and we must highlight ethical issues in relation to road use. So having finished my PhD, I then set up the non-profit company, the Road Ethics Project, expressly for this purpose, so that we can get ethical conversations going, enhance ethical literacy, and promote ethical reasoning. And this comes back to the behavior change, which has been mentioned by previous speakers. It's changing insights and then changing behavior. And we're especially focused, naturally, on the mass mobilities like public transport, scholar transport, and non-motorized transport, and also on the most vulnerable road users. So just very briefly, our inaugural project last year was the Road Heroes Award. It was sponsored by Master Drive and won by Ari Surlis, the former chairperson of the Quad Para Association, in recognition of him being the visionary behind some of the amazing road safety work done by that association. And for this award, we collaborated with the OT Association of South Africa. But the plan going forward is that we will partner with other road-related disciplines, and we are hoping that a 2020 award will still be feasible. So I want to thank you for your attention. I hope I've injected a bit of a bioethics and a public health awareness into the talk, into the discussions around TDM. And thank you very much for your support.
Thank you so much, Lee. Indeed, you have. Thank you very much for that. And thank you for bringing ethical issues into the equation. I think it's so important, clearly. You know, we tend to forget that. And if you just look at the dissatisfaction of the commuters with the taxi industry, you know, that's quite concerning. So clearly, what you are doing is extremely important. So thank you very much for this. And please stay unmuted and have your video on. I would like the other presenters of this morning, Lee Stolworthy and Mateta, to join in and unmute themselves so that we can have the panel discussion. Eugene and Caesar, you guys obviously also welcome to join in, our presenters of this afternoon, and we will give the the people opportunity to pose questions now to the panelists. Let's give the media, the journalists, opportunity first to ask questions. And I know Liesel is here with us and so on. Liesel, don't know if your sound is working this time. She had problems in the past with the microphone. So let's give a few seconds and see if the media want to ask some questions. Okay, doesn't seem to be on this stage they want to. So let's have a look at the chat box, and I'll give you guys opportunity just now to directly ask questions as well. Here's a question from Wasim Khan. Hi Wasim, long time not seeing you. But his question is for Lee Stolworthy, and I think the other panelists can comment on this as well. He's saying the major requirement for utilizing the benefits of the fourth industrial revolution, in brackets, online shopping, working from home, online conferences, etc., from a TDM perspective, is having access to a reliable internet connection. Has the city taken, one, people's access to a reliable internet connection, and two, people's ability to afford the reliable internet connection into account? So that is the question from Wasim. Lee, maybe you can respond to that.
Okay, yeah, thanks. Thanks, Wasim. Good question. Good questions. I think, you know, in my presentation at the end, I was sort of mentioning a couple of things that are happening anyway, and the fourth industrial revolution and the implications of that in terms of online capabilities is one of those things. It's sort of outside of the traditional mandate of transport and travel demand management, but it's a key influencer and a multiplier in that space. So I think it's a critical point because access to internet obviously affects your ability to utilize and maximize those opportunities. But we haven't done any analysis on the availability of internet and the affordability of internet access for various people in different parts of the city. But we know from previous experience when we were developing a product with some colleagues at MIT around developing an app for the minibus taxi industry that we had some initial challenges with regards to data availability and capabilities and how we were building that product. But what we realized during the process is that the internet access is actually quite good, but it's predominantly from mobile devices, not from computers. And I don't have the exact statistics, and I don't remember who did the study at the time. It was either Deloitte or PwC or one of those, but I think it was that more than 90% of internet accessed is by mobile devices rather than from computers. But we don't have any data with regards to the coverage or the spread of that. And I think that's something that we will have to really start to think about in the future, because I would suspect that there are some significant spatial dynamics around the availability and the affordability of internet to be able to maximize those opportunities of the fourth industrial revolution. I know that from talking to my colleagues in the IT department at the City of Cape Town, where we were talking about enablement mechanisms for city employees, that they are also considering broadband and access to better quality connectivity in terms of internet at different parts of the city. And that's something that they're looking into. But I don't have specific answers to those questions, but I acknowledge the fact that there are critical considerations going forward in terms of TDM benefits of the fourth industrial revolution. So thanks for the question. And sorry, I can't give you very specific answers, but yeah, we've thought about it, but we don't have the data.
Thank you, Lee. I've got a question in the chat box. You guys are welcome to have a look in the chat box. From Susan Holmes, she's saying, has real-time anonymized and aggregated data from telecommunications companies been considered to provide accurate computer patterns? Yeah, so maybe let's take that one question. I don't know if one of the panelists want to respond.
Maybe I can just jump in quickly. Susan, real-time data, it's the holy grail. It's the thing that you want, but you can never seem to get, right? But real-time data is where it's at, if you can get it. And traditionally, it's really hard to get hold of that information. And I think the cell phone companies have not been in the past been willing to release that information unless you pay for it. And so we don't have access to that information yet, but always hopeful that it'll become available at some point in the future, because real-time data is what everybody needs and what everybody wants, to be able to manage things in real time and to react to things in real time. We're looking at some of my colleagues in the network department in transport are looking into the application of sensors in the network and how we can apply sensors to different parts of the network to collect real-time data so that we can do real-time optimization of the network. So there are other ways to get real-time data, but we don't have the cell phone data yet. I don't know if other colleagues or speakers want to add to that, maybe got more experience with that than me.
Yeah, we have used mobile phone data for some time now. I think since around 2006, thereabout, we experimented with it. And what we found was that it works best where you've got longer travel, where you can reproduce some pattern. But when it comes to things like walking, the signal would typically jump and you couldn't really make up what is happening. So it works well for certain modes and not others. But then also you need to train your data very well because a lot changes in the data. To make sense of what is there, you need to observe it over an extended period of time. If, for example, you want to establish what is home in all of this data, what is work, what is other land use purposes, you really need to spend time training that data. So it is quite intensive. But you can get useful data. But on its own, it is not complete. You still need to have some additional information. Why do you do what you do? I mean, you can observe what is happening, but if you don't know why it's happening, then you can be misled into doing things that are not appropriate. Thanks.
Thank you, Leon and Mateta. Susan, don't you want to unmute yourself? I see some of the questions you've asked have been answered already partially in the presentations. I don't know if you've got more to ask or to say something perhaps. Susan, you're welcome to unmute.
Thank you, Harry. No, that's fine. It's given enough of a door opening to what I was looking for in terms of information. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Susan. Take care. Thanks for joining in. All right. I'm just into the chat box here again. I see here's a question from Gershwin Fortune. Gershwin, thank you. You're a friend of the Transport Forum always. I really thank you for your support. And Gershwin also helped me arranging the session, so I really appreciate Gershwin's support. Gershwin has got a question to Lee Randall. Don't you think the core problem is that taxi drivers chase a daily revenue target with influences, which influences their behavior to maximize revenue? I don't blame the drivers, but this model needs to be reviewed. He's asking some comments. Lee, I don't know if you want to comment on that.
Yes, absolutely. Gershwin, I think the target system, which is not only true in our minibus taxi industry, but is true in paratransit systems around the world, is the target is probably the single biggest factor influencing driver behavior. And the target system is just one element of a set of work conditions that place enormous demands on the drivers. So in my research, the average workday is 15 hours, well beyond what the sectoral determination specifies. The average income, which is a very slippery beast, very difficult to measure, was well beneath what the sectoral determination specifies because, for instance, there's a lack of recognition of overtime work, there's a lack of a night shift allowance, and also a lack of employment contracts, pay slips, paid leave. So the packages that the drivers are getting are hugely responsible for some of the ways in which they drive. And I think we have a huge opportunity for reverse engineering of the industry under COVID conditions, because if Department of Labor and Department of Transport would both tackle the work conditions of the drivers, we could start to see some meaningful behavior change. and I've argued that in a number of different ways. I think we have a huge opportunity here. I hope we're not going to miss the opportunity as a country. The fact is that society has condoned a mass transit mode that carries many commuters, but in a very suboptimal way. And the drivers at literally the guys with their hands on the wheels are probably exploited, and that is one factor in keeping the industry viable. And I think a big microscope has been directed at the industry currently, and there are many social conversations happening around it and around the fact that many people have a limited set of alternatives to using taxis, and the drivers certainly have a limited set of alternatives in terms of generating income. So in a way, we've all been captive to the way things have happened. And now is an opportunity to think through what could happen differently. Formalization, professionalization, and definitely some sort of upliftment of the drivers specifically, and bringing their work conditions into line with the legislation which does already exist. It just hasn't been enforced adequately, and it goes against the culture of how the industry has operated for decades. So there's massive behavior change needed, and government as the system designer and the system enforcer has a great role to play.
Thank you, Dr. Lee. There's another question for you, and I think the other panelists can also comment actually on this one. And it's from Thabo Lekoko. He's saying, nice presentation, also informative. My question is, how best can taxi operators be integrated to development plans? For example, ITPs and transport master plans.
Okay, very good question. And I'm involved in a travel behavior review, a systematic review of scientific research on travel behavior in Africa and the Caribbean. And we're still in the process of the review. It's an international consortium. But what's very clear is that Africa is struggling and trying to adopt a whole lot of models which actually may be more workable in high income countries, such as BRTs and other kinds of good looking models, but models which in fact may not be best designed for the poorest of the poor and their mobility needs. And one thing that's very clear is that we're not alone as South Africa in a sort of official attempt to remove paratransit from the transport mix, to formalize it, regulate it, or move it over into last mile, first mile roles only. But those attempts seem to be failing in many African cities with mass urbanization and people's pressing demands for daily mobility. The borders, the trotros, the dala-dalas, the matatus, and our minibus taxis are simply not going to go away because the demand persists for them. So this whole notion that we can get everyone onto buses, get everyone into much more glamorous and formalized looking transport modes, I think is problematic in itself. I'm not sure what the answers are. There are other countries that are looking to our model of integration, for instance, the BRTs, and how transport taxi operators are being or have been drawn into those. But I live on a rail via route in Johannesburg that is about 4 years behind schedule. And I can see on a daily basis that things are not working as per the plan. Gauteng on the Move, the government plan released a few years back, basically wrote out the minibus taxi industry. But within a year or so of that plan being released, Ismail Vadi, then MEC for transport in Gauteng, he was publicly on record as saying, actually, the minibus taxi industry is quite a workable part of the mix. So what's on paper and what's in the vision for the future may be one thing. What the reality is may be something else altogether. And we have to have discussions with the poorest of the poor to know what is going to be the best transit mix for the future. And then how do we make that safe, decent, affordable, etc.
Thank you, Lee. Don't know if one of the other panelists also want to comment on that.
Yeah, Harry, maybe I can add to that. I think this is a very interesting conversation, and you know, at the City of Cape Town, we've tried to, through our integrated public transport network planning process, to develop a balanced multimodal system that considers the role of each mode in the public transport mix in terms of the size and the capacity of each of those modes to meet a demand profile in particular corridors. So it's about getting the right balance and the right mix of public transport response to a demand profile that exists or that is emerging over time. And in that space, there's a lot of lessons that we've learned with regards to BRT implementation and the role of the minibus taxi industry in relation to that, because we know the BRT system typically has two parts, right? It's the trunk that's the bulk carrier of people, high-speed dedicated lanes, but then you need to get the people to the trunk first. And so the distribution network and considerations that are being undertaken at the city at the moment is what could the role potentially be of the taxi industry with a smaller size vehicle to act as the distribution network. But if you do that, there are implications with that consideration. If they're having to operate at a schedule now, does that affect their ability to break even in terms of profit and revenue and cost? So all of these things need to be thought about, because if you enter into a realm where you're dictating a schedule to the taxi industry, you enter into a subsidy conversation because you're affecting their ability to break even. So all of these things need to be thought through carefully in terms of the financial aspects of it, as well as the role of the industry in the broader mix of public transport offerings.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you, Lee. Mateta, there's a question for you, so maybe I can pose a question to you, and then you can also comment if you want to on the previous question. This is from Paul Muela. He says to Dr. Mateta, you spoke about being quick to say something is not working, taking into consideration the cost of operating a BRT system. What is your view about its role in public transport and the future thereof?
Okay. Here's the thing. It depends on what you're using to measure performance. If you're using a scale, like a weight, your weight, you're using a ruler to measure your weight, and you're saying you're going to go on a weight loss program, chances are it will not be successful. So you need to ask yourself, what is it? What do you mean when you say it's not working? What scale are you using? What informs that measure? So from the beginning, you need to say, this is why I'm doing what I'm doing, and then measure it against that which you said you're going to be doing, as opposed to just measuring it using an ad hoc measure. So if you look at, for example, what happened in the city of Johannesburg recently, the city used what is called the total social cost of transport to measure the impact of interventions, technological interventions. And it was quite clear that there's a certain proportion of technologies that you need in your network so that society as a whole pays the least for transport. Currently, we're probably paying 5% more of GDP than we should for transport. So we are paying for it. Now, that is the backlog. Now, going forward, you want to say, how then can I make sure that the society pays lesser and lesser for transport? Now, investing in these technologies helps you then reduce that backlog. But the perspective is at a societal level. It's not at a route level. It's not at just taxi versus BRT, and that would be a wrong measure to use. And then perhaps also to just add to what the colleague said earlier, for integrating taxi and into the networks. Well, we see that the cost of taxi is quite a lot if not properly managed at a network level. So there's a role for it. Left unmanaged, of course, the society will pay a lot more. What we see is that in the household surveys that have been released or generated, is that most of the rail users, use some other modes of transport. About 50% of the rail users would use some other mode to connect to rail. So one of the hanging fruit is to say, to subsidize taxis, perhaps we need to incentivize that connectivity with rail, so that the total costs to society are reduced. Some people will not be happy about it. Some people will lose, but society as a whole will benefit because you're consuming less, of resources, limited resources, going forward. Thanks.
Thank you, Matesa. Interesting comment made here by Lawrence Basson. He says, why is there no tax benefits to companies or individuals who use public transport, versus individual or private transport? So that's a quite interesting. I think it goes along with the saying that, rather incentivize the commuter than the operator, or subsidize the commuter than the operator. So I don't know if the panelists to comment on this, and then maybe also do some closing remarks as well, as we're running out of time for this panel discussion. There will be a panel discussion later on again when people will have opportunities. But okay, so the panelists maybe comment on this and include the closing remarks. Thank you. Starting with Mateta.
All right, just say that again. Got connectivity issues.
Okay, he's saying that why is there no tax benefits for companies or individuals who are using public transport, versus private transport? And include some closing comments, please.
All right, closing comments. That's an interesting take. And so, I mean, some people are saying society is actually subsidizing government. Minibus taxis are subsidizing government. If I have a car, it's not because I want to have that car often, is because there isn't a proper service to service me from where I want to move to where I want to go. So there is a strong case to be made, by society to say, let's get a pact going. The financing, the pricing of services, of networks, mobility. Let's have a conversation there. So there is a definite scope for having a conversation. But I think lastly, I just want to say that, a lot of what we need to do is dance. We need to have the dance moves, in what we do. There are lots of people involved in what we do. There are operators, there's business, there's government, and it's not about the one interest group versus the other. It's how we dance. We need to have a rhythm, going forward. We don't step on each other's toes. Have a rhythm. We need to dance, and we need to learn to dance, going forward. That's an art form, but there's also a science to it. Thanks, Eric.
Thank you very much, Mateta. We'll be dancing with you. Let's have Lee Randall, Dr. Lee Randall. Thank you. Closing remarks.
Great, thank you. I think the issue of subsidies is absolutely critical in terms of the minibus taxi industry. And I like the concept that the industry is in fact subsidizing government or society, we could say. And if I were to pick a part of the industry that is really carrying the burden of that subsidy, it is probably the drivers who are not being paid at the level that the sectoral determination requires. I want to just point out that we tend to think in terms of subsidies immediately connected to things like schedules, and to convert what's been a very flexible service into a scheduled service may not be the way to go. There may be other measures by which subsidies can be justified. The market inquiry into the public transport market that was run by the Competition Commission for the first time really made it clear that this mass mode, which carries about 70% of commuters, effectively has received 1% of government subsidies. And that has been a very specific form of subsidy, namely the taxi recap program, which in many people's views, has not really done much to improve the fleet or to uplift the industry. So it's a bit bizarre that this mass mode has attracted such a tiny slice of the subsidy cake. And it's literally left the public in the hands of private operators on whom they're dependent for their day-to-day transport. So one of the solutions I can see is to think very differently about subsidies. Possibly, yes, put some subsidization in the hands of commuters. And one could start with particular target groups, such as SASA beneficiaries, or as many other countries do, card-carrying learners, card-carrying students. And in that way, start to subsidize the industry in a new form. So I think there's great room for creative thinking around this whole issue of subsidization and formalization. Thanks very much, Harry.
Thank you so much, Lee, for those wise words and your participation. We really appreciate that. Can we have Lee Stolworthy? Please note there's a question for you in the chat box as well. So you can either kindly answer the question in the chat box or stay online for this afternoon's panel discussion. It's up to you. Thank you, Lee.
Thanks, Harry, and thanks for giving me the last word. Yeah, I think I'll dodge the SARS tax question, but it's interesting conversation to be had. And we've been thinking about this a lot as well in the city, and it's what you said before. Do you subsidize the operator or do you subsidize the user? And I think there's opportunities that may come out in this space in terms of integrated ticketing systems, which we can apply, and how we manage the finance arrangements around those and the business aspects of that. We're putting together an integrated ticketing strategic framework at the moment to try and unpack all of those moving parts and how we need to consider those things going forward. And I think that will be part of that discussion around incentivizing public transport usage and to the user, etc. But it may also influence the subsidy conversation as well. But Helen's question is really interesting, and it's more in my wheelhouse around the sort of the socioeconomic and the land use implications of all of these things and these dynamics. And this is something exactly that we're talking to our spatial planning colleagues about at the moment, is the implications of all of these things and all of these little variables and moving parts with regards to what makes people travel. You know, I think Dr. Mokonyana was talking earlier on about the speed flow density theory and the fact that traditionally engineers are looking at the size of the road and thinking about how we can accommodate all the cars. And now we're thinking about why are the cars there? Why are they, where are they going to? And why are they not going in the other direction? And this is a result of land use and the spatial relationships between land use. But there's also a sub-dynamic below that around different classes of people and income groups in the city and where they live in space and what types of jobs do they do. So we know that you can't work from home if you're working in a factory. And the guy that fixes potholes for a living, he can't do that at home. So those people still need to travel. And where do those people live in relation to where they work? And these are a lot of the spatial dynamics that we're having conversations around with our spatial planning colleagues and building future land use scenarios around these kind of considerations. So interesting question, and I'd love to spend more time talking about it, but we can't.
Thank you, Lee. Ladies and gents, let's give these panelists a hand for their great contribution this morning. We really appreciate it. And hopefully we will see a lot of you again in the future. So thank you very much. Ladies and gents, we will take a short break now till 11:30, and then we'll continue with the second portion of this conference. Thank you very much. See you in 10 minutes' time.
Good day, Harry.
Right, there we're back again. Thank you for hanging in there, guys. You see a lot of people are still part of the forum, and we really appreciate that. Excuse me. Let me just share my screen. So our next presenter for this session is Eugene van Niekerk. He's Executive Product Solutions of SIG Fleet Management by Insigo. And he's going to talk to us about telemetry used intelligently. Thank you very much, Eugene.
Good morning, Harry, and good morning to everybody that's participating in this session. Harry, thank you very much for the invitation, and again, as I said earlier this morning, for the opportunity as SIG to be part of the Transport Forum once again, and hoping to be able to share with you some information this morning. As you said earlier, Harry, can you hear me, Harry?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, perfect. Can you see my screen?
Yes, we can.
Okay, perfect. So, as you said earlier this morning, Harry, you know, SIG has been around in South Africa and internationally for over 35 years. And we've also been part of the Transport Forum for some time. And as you said, you know, from the start of the Transport Forum, and SIG being a company that was started locally in South Africa and growing into an international footprint, has been dealing with many different industries worldwide over a period of time. And over the last 35 years, as technology has changed, SIG has, you know, changed with that technology, has adapted with that technology, and has always been the provider of information through the use of technology. And our subject this morning is telemetry used intelligently. And for me, it is important that we just understand exactly what the definition of telemetry is. Telemetry is the collection of measurements or other data at remote points and their automatic transmission to receiving equipment for monitoring. So telemetry is quite a wide term. I think it encompasses quite a lot of information. And the key thing about telemetry is the ability to collect measurements, to collect information, to do that in a remote manner, and then to automatically transmit that data into an environment where we can use that data to our benefit. And if you understand the telemetry environment, SIG has always been a company that's, as I said, supplied information. And the key thing is that many different industries look at this telemetry information in different ways. And we have summarized the data that people receive from telemetry devices into what we call 5 key management areas. And for every industry, these management areas might differ. And so if we use examples like cash in transit and the industry of moving valuable assets, then the focus of information is often focused at a risk perspective. And that risk is the safety of not only the driver of that vehicle or the passengers of that vehicle, but potentially also the cargo or the load that they are carrying. And there's always a security focus in those industries, making sure that those assets stay safe and that the cargo on those assets stay safe. If we look at industries like the mining industry, for example, there's a massive focus on safety. And safety is one of the key management areas that they drive. And through managing information like driving behavior on equipment and on vehicles, the mining industry can obtain benefits, substantial benefits by improving the driving and therefore improving the safety and adhering to those safety regulations. So I'm not going to go through all 5 of these key management areas. And as we've said, these presentations will be shared with all the parties. But the key thing for me is that telemetry and the information that is received can be used and must be used at specific focus areas, irrespective of where it falls within these environments. Often, big organizations, many organizations have a focus in all of these pillars. You'll definitely have a revenue increase. Most companies, and we've been speaking this morning about the impact of COVID, the economic impact. And at this time and in these times, it is crucial to control costs, number one, but in some way also endeavor to improve your revenue and increase your revenue. So it is fundamentally important to measure the right things to be able to obtain that benefit for your business. Now, if we look at using telemetry intelligently, the example that you're seeing on the screen is a model that was created by using accelerometer data from a tracking device that is installed in a vehicle. And this model basically just shows what is called the X, the Y, and the Z axis. So it's the way that the vehicle is being driven and the measurements that are being taken to tell us how good or how bad this vehicle is actually being driven. Now, if we use telemetry and if we use technology to record this information remotely, and we transmit this into a software environment, into a back-end environment, if we understand how this works, we can then use this type of information to improve management or monitoring algorithms. So there's a lot of information on the screen here, but it basically just want to portray the message that we can record information at millisecond increments. And if we use that amount of data and we portray that into a driving, let's call it a driver rating algorithm, and we understand how this information is working, and we change and improve the algorithm, then the results can be quite significant. So in this example that I'm showing on the screen, what basically happened was we recorded tracking information, accelerometer information, for a vehicle that was driven for roughly around 10 minutes. And during that time period, we recorded 56,000 events, driving events, accelerometer events. So that's typically your harsh braking, your harsh acceleration, your harsh cornering information that is measured by the accelerometer. And if we used an algorithm that looked at the data in a more conservative, historical manner, the exceptions, the underlying sets of information, or those accelerometer values that we considered excessive driving or excessive behavior, would have constituted only 109 events of that 10-minute driving period, equating to roughly about a second's worth of information. But if we use this telemetry data intelligently, and if we apply a different model, because we now have a better understanding of how a vehicle behaves and how a vehicle operates, and we create an improved algorithm and we apply it to the same set of data, then suddenly we get a huge improvement in our understanding of how a vehicle is being driven. Or if we wanted to say, you know, how good or how bad is a person driving a particular vehicle. So outside of the new algorithm would be constituted bad driving. And if we look at the information intelligently, we now see that we have a 10% exception rate outside of what we expect to be good driving or safe driving. So we have the ability to use technology, and if we apply the information correctly and in a better way, we can have a significant improvement in the way we see how vehicles and how equipment are being utilized. Having telemetry information is critical. And the next few slides that I want to share is basically just an illustration of how really fundamentally important it is to have a complete picture of what is happening. And you'll see, sorry, just before I go there. So telemetry, as I said, is the measurement of information. And there's many ways that information can be measured on a vehicle and in a vehicle and a transport or a logistics environment. And I'm not here to say, you know, any of these or all of these is necessary, but there are so many ways that we can measure information, from managing the driver and measuring the driver, measuring engine capability on a vehicle, or tire pressure, or being able to measure the fuel usage or the consumption on a vehicle, to be able to accurately monitor and record the weight that is being transported in a vehicle, or managing assets, or recording temperature in a refrigerated environment, or having multiple cameras that can actually provide insight and context to a situation and what's been happening. And if we have information available, we are in a position to make improved decisions. And that, of course, leads to huge benefits. And I'll share some of the benefits at a later stage. So for me, and the message that I want to share this morning is that there's many things that we can measure. There's many ways we can measure. But the real critical thing is that we make sure that we have a complete picture. And as I said, the next few slides is there to illustrate how important it is to have a complete picture. So let's say, for argument's sake, I invested in technology and I installed a tracking device in a vehicle. This device would be recording information as the vehicle is being driven. So for every trip that the vehicle is used, we are recording information. And through the ability to remotely measure and transmit that data, you can now see the results of what was happening. And in this example, this is a model, a demonstration of an accelerometer or data that is being recorded by a vehicle. And looking at the data, and if we have a little bit of understanding of the technology, something happened. I can see that something happened in this trip, in this vehicle. So if I play the model, what basically happens is the vehicle is driving along, the system is recording information consistently, and at some point there is an exception. And the system records this exception. It transmits this information, as we've seen. It transmits this information. We receive it in our user interface, in our software, in our mobile app, whichever mechanism we're utilizing to measure this. And we get a warning that something happened. Now, as a user of this information, I know that something happened. I'm not 100% sure exactly where it happened, and I'm not sure exactly what happened. So for me to really understand, what happened, I now need to do quite a few things. I need to either phone the driver, get hold of the driver and then ask him, you know, I can see there's an event, you know, what happened? Or I have to wait until that driver returns to the business so that I can debrief and ask him, you know, at that date, at that time, your device recorded an incident. Please explain to me what happened. And then the driver has the ability to share what happened, but his version of what happened. So it really is important that we have a full picture. Now, if we added a bit of telemetry, if we added another measurement, and in this instance, we added a single front-facing camera as a technology in the vehicle that was also recording information at the same time that the vehicle was being driven, then I would have much more information about what actually occurred during this particular incident. If I play this model, I now suddenly see that the vehicle is driving, that there is an event, and if I look at the detail, the driver is actually avoiding an accident. So now I have a completely different perspective on what happened. And in such a case like this example, you know, I could very well say to the driver, well done, you know, you actually avoided the accident, you know, the traffic was backing up, and well done, you know, that's good on you. But if we used another set of technology and we added a second camera to this solution that now looked at the driver as well, now I have a completely different picture. So by having the correct information in the vehicle or in the situation, I now have a complete picture of what actually occurred, what actually happened. Now, without the tracking device, I wouldn't have known, number one, that there was an incident. But without the two cameras, I wouldn't actually have quite the detail that I needed to understand and analyze what was happening here. So using technology and using telemetry is really important, but how we apply that information is really critical. Now, many companies use technology, you know, like a C-track device in the vehicles, and we record a lot of information. So we record everything from, you know, when the vehicle is driven, who's driving that vehicle, where is the vehicle operated, how is that vehicle driven. And all of that data is continuously recorded. And in many instances, that information is available in some form of a report. So I could generate a report for the last week to tell me a specific vehicle, how many speeding violations did that vehicle have. And in most instances, the technology and the answer I would get was, this particular vehicle had 50 speeding violations. And that's good because I know this driver is not adhering to the speed limit. But the challenge that we face is that if we have a fleet of vehicles, let's say for argument's sake, we have a fleet of 50 vehicles. Now I have 50 vehicles driving around the country, and I have 50 drivers recording, in this instance, speeding violations or speeding events. But if I do not use the information intelligently, then it doesn't have a lot of value for me. Now, by using that recorded GPS speeding events and by using heat maps, you have the ability to suddenly see 50 drivers over a month, over a week, over whatever period you've selected, And not only do I see that they are actually exceeding the speed limit, but by using this information intelligently, by showing this information in a heat map type format, I can actually see that most of the drivers are speeding in the same places. And by having that insight, I can now start becoming proactive. I can now start saying, guys, when you are moving down to the N3, down towards Durban, I can see on the route that you're following that everybody is speeding in the same locations. Now, if we take those locations and we say this is Van Reenen's Pass, where we know the risk of vehicles traveling and potentially having accidents, then we actually have insight. Then we know what is actually our risk exposure. So by using this in a clever manner, in a better way, we now actually have a better set of data that we can use. That's all good and well to have this data. And in many instances, this information is recorded and reported in software at an office with a manager, with a fleet manager, a transport manager. In many instances, this information has to be processed. And if you want to get the big benefit, then that data also has to be debriefed to the driver. Now, mechanisms that will actually make this easier is the ability to use that in some form of a reporting mechanism to the driver. So again, using that information cleverly and intelligently by creating a mobile app that the driver now sees, we can actually show the driver his driving behavior. So we're doing this in real time as he is using the vehicle, and we're showing him that how he is performing as a driver of this fleet of vehicles. And, you know, relating back to the discussions we've had on the taxis and the transport environments, you know, now I can actually show the driver how he is performing. So it really is important to give that feedback, to give that real-time feedback on how he is performing. But I think it's even more important to let that driver know the way he is performing is good. But if I measure that driver in comparison to the guys that does the same work as what he does, I can now tell that driver that if I measure him against his peers, the guys that he works with on a daily basis, the other drivers that's transporting, or the other taxi operators that's operating, or the mining vehicle that's working, if I can show the driver how he is comparing to those guys that's similar to him, I think that has huge value. Because now the driver in this example can see, but he's actually at the same level as the rest of the guys that's performing with him. But what is even more importantly is that if I can show the driver compared to the whole company and to guys that may be operating in other divisions in the business, how is he comparing against that? So 89 out of 100, I don't think is a bad driver rating score. And compared to his direct peers, you know, he's equal, is 89, but he's actually slightly less than the national fleet, than the rest of the company. And fortunately for us, not unfortunately, fortunately for us, human nature tells us that if you show somebody how he's performing, he would like to actually perform as well as the guys on national level. Now, I think that is using telemetry information intelligently. It's not just sitting in a stack of reports on a desk. It's actually showing people what's happening and how things are happening. Now, if you have this information, then again, there's changes that happen. There's many benefits that happen. Another way of using information intelligently is by providing this detail in graphical format. You know, telemetry is generating a huge amount of information, a lot of data. And whilst this is good, sometimes it is very, very time consuming to analyze and to go through this. So a better way of doing this is to present the data in a manner that actually tells you what is happening, what is improving, and what is not improving. So by using dashboard information, by using graphical information, it's quite easy to now see in this example that I have on the screen that the driver behavior score has increased from 57 points in August to 57.4. So September is actually worse than it was in September. So it is easier to understand where the problems are. It's not just a lot of data. So if we add intelligence to the data, it makes this a lot easier to understand, to consume, but also to use in our businesses, to improve our businesses. I'm hampering on speeding because speeding is just something that I think everybody can relate to. Speeding, unfortunately, in a fleet of vehicles, whether it's cars or whether it's buses or public transport vehicles, whether it's heavy commercial vehicles that's transporting goods, speeding is one of those things that impact quite a few places. So if you tend to speed, you need to also stop quicker if something happens. And that has a direct impact on stuff like the maintenance on your vehicles, the brake linings and the tires, and the potential accidents that could happen. So speeding is something that a lot of people focus on because it is quite easy to actually address. But all speeding is also not the same. And in this next example, if we use speeding in what is referenced, what we call a speed band or a speed category, we can now actually see where is our biggest risk. So in this example, which is an international example, we can clearly see that there's different speed bands. The top of the graph shows me clearly that I have 20 mile-an-hour speed bands. That's the road speed limit of a vehicle. 30 hours, 40, 50, 60, 70. From this graph, I can see my biggest problem lies within the 30 mile-an-hour speed band range. This is where most of my speeding events are happening. It's not at the top end. It's not at the high speed. It's not when I'm on the open road. It's not when I'm traveling on the freeway. This is actually happening in my urban areas. This is what is happening when I'm traveling between houses or when I'm traveling in front of a school or past the shopping center. There is my biggest risk, not at the high end of the spectrum. Now we can also use this data more intelligently, and we can say, if we create speed categories, so let's say for 1 or 2, in this example, 1 or 2 miles above the speed limit, and if this was a 30 mile-an-hour speed zone, then I could say, if it's between 31 and 32 miles an hour, that would constitute a category 1 exception. And then a category 2 could be anything above 5, and category 3 is 5 miles or above. Then I can clearly see where my potential risk lies. So I'm using the telemetry data, but I'm using it intelligently. And now I suddenly see that I need to focus on my category 3 areas because these are the ones that is the highest risk. This is where I'm traveling above 35 miles an hour in a 30 mile-an-hour zone. And that is where if I have to brake because there's a child that's running across the road, chances are much higher of an accident or a severe accident. So it really is important to not only record data and to receive that data, but how we apply that data is fundamentally important. Now, many companies, and with our assistance, and we're also always learning from the industries and from the people that we work with. But if you use this information and if you use it well, the benefits can be substantial. And the benefits can actually be quantifiable. And in an environment and at a time where cost savings is critical for the longevity of a business, it really is important to manage this information properly. So now, by focusing on something as simple as speeding, I can have a massive reduction in fuel. I can have a huge reduction in accidents because speeding and accidents, unfortunately, sort of tie together. And if I'm reducing accidents, then naturally I'm also reducing my insurance premiums, and that I need to be able to work with. So the maintenance cost is a direct link again to those accidents and those driving behavior. So by using that information properly, intelligently, we can have huge benefits. I want to basically end off my session by just sharing a few case studies where people that has been with C-Track for some time and by using telemetry for some time have obtained significant benefits. So this is a long distance transport business. You can see that they operate in South Africa, but also in the SADC countries. They have a fleet of approximately 100 vehicles, different types of vehicles, and they transport different types of things. So they've got different types of vehicles, drop sites, they've got tip trailers. And the key thing for them is they used technology, they used the telemetry information, and they focused on reducing speeding events. And by using the information that was provided to them, you know, they've reported a 4% fuel saving in 1 month on those 100 vehicles. Now, if you think that those vehicles are doing approximately 1.3 million kilometers a month, you know, you can actually calculate the fuel consumed. And if we work at a very conservative 2 kilometers per liter of fuel consumption on a heavy commercial vehicle, you know, 4% equates to roughly about 360,000 Rand, which is significant. And by focusing only on one element of driving behavior, they were able to achieve this. Now, it is very possible if you're using the technology on other areas of the business that those benefits could be realized as well. Another example is a UK-based company, Anglian Water. And you can see the numbers, increase in fuel efficiency of 10%. A direct link is the reduction in carbon emissions, because if you use less fuel, of course, you have less carbon exposed. 50% reduction in speeding, a 63% reduction in speeding convictions. And that, of course, relates to a reduction in accidents. So by measuring, and I think Lee said it right in the front, I think in the very first meeting or the very first presentation, he actually said, if you can't measure it, you can't monitor it. You can't manage it. It really is important to use the ability, the technology to record something intelligently. One off lastly, with a use case from an aviation environment where KLM is managing their ground equipment in an airport environment. And by using different functionalities from the telemetry and by recording this information in a real-time manner, and by sharing this information with their billing and with their financial systems, with the HR and the ERP systems, you know, they've reduced 6% on their ground equipment, their ground support equipment, just because they are optimizing and utilizing the equipment in a better way. So they don't have to have all the spare equipment that's standing around, and for many years have been there because we need enough machines. We never have enough equipment. But by using telemetry intelligently, and by now having a better and a complete picture of what's happening, they've been able to reduce that capex of 6%. And on a fleet of nearly 1,000 pieces of equipment, you can just imagine what that financial implication is for them. So thank you very much, Harry. Thank you for the time and for the opportunity to share thoughts and a little bit of information on using telemetry differently. Thank you for the time.
Eugene, thank you so much. This is what they say, the bigger picture. I've never seen it this way. Thank you very much for this. Makes a lot of sense, you know, especially if you think about, you know, how to understand it and analyze it and administering it and processing it, you know. just to reap the benefit and the communication, you know, everything that needs to happen. Clearly, this is not a thing you can do on your own. You know, we definitely need an organization like yourselves to do this. And I'm quite sure it's not that expensive anyway, you know, to have all these benefits. Maybe
No,
you
for
can,
sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, Harry,
Absolutely.
you know, technology is changing. It is advancing quite a bit. And, you know, it is in many instances, it is getting more affordable. So, but I think the importance is to use the technology. It is available, it's out there. And I think, you know, it would be unwise to try and do this by yourself. I think there's a lot of things that can help you to do this, and companies like ourselves that can help you to achieve this.
Will you be available for questions and answers just now?
For sure. Yeah, no problem at all, Harry.
Thank you, Eugene. Much appreciated. So our next presenter then is our host as well. It is Sizu Mtsagnaka, and she's the head of research of the Winye Group, and she's going to talk about understanding commuter patterns. Thank you very much, Sizu.
Thank you. I'm just going to share my presentation. Can't share. Okay, great.
That's fine, working great. Thank you, Sizu.
Is that perfect? Thank you so much.
Perfect, thank you.
Great, guys. Yeah. As for this afternoon, I feel that there's been an amazing golden thread in terms of how everything has been presented from this first session, where the guys were basically taking us through the more technical and infrastructural based view of demand management in the public transport industry. I quite enjoyed Dr. Mateta's presentation because it spoke quite closely to what I was going to present, in a sense that the view should be holistic in terms of how we do demand management, because the customer's perspective or the commuter's perspective is just as important in how we planning to meet this demand in the public transport. So on my first slide, it's basically that that being aware of the traveler's behavior is the first step to delivering better public transport user experience. And I think a couple of speakers also alluded to how the public transport user experience has been disadvantaged by the special planning, which is something that we've inherited and are not necessarily successfully challenging how our transport infrastructure needs to improve or take a futuristic view on catering for the user. And the basic elements of what a traveler actually goes through before they choose where they want to go is a couple of elements. They basically think about the purpose in terms of why they're traveling, the timing implications. They look at the duration of traveling or how long it will take them to get there. And the location in terms of where they're going, as well as who they will be taking with as participants. They think about the cost in terms of how much will it cost me to travel, and then they think about, well, which is the best mode will I choose for that? And this is basically like a basic element of a traveler. When you look at the public transport traveler view, purpose, timing, and duration are still the most important, but then the mode becomes slightly more important in terms of choosing which mode I'll be using to travel, followed by location in terms of where am I now and where do I want to go, and then the route. They think about where is it connecting to, where are the access points, and so on, as well as will I be traveling with someone, and lastly it's about the cost of how much it will cost them to get there. So this is sort of like the mindset that consumers go through when considering their public transport usage. What we also know from the National Household Travel Survey is that majority of households in South Africa do use public transport. However, when you compare these to people that are working, which I think alludes to the congestion issue in the Western Cape, is that people that are working are mostly preferring to use their own private cars than public transport. And those that are using public transport, we had about 69% saying that they use taxis as their daily public mode. And then rail and buses. Rail at about 10%, and then bus services at about 20%. Although when we look at when they think about transport, cost is normally sort of like at the bottom of the list, we can see here that actually the cost of traveling, which I think has been a contentious issue in the industry, is that those that are actually working are paying quite a lot to get themselves to work, and you'll find that households are spending up to 26% for traveling costs to their destinations. And then looking at attitudes towards the public transport facilities, some of the biggest concerns from consumers is with regards to facilities, and then it's regards to the types of service that they get from the bus drivers or the taxi drivers towards the passengers. They're concerned about issues of safety, and they're concerned about fares as well, and then the level of crowding in the taxis and buses and trains. And I can only assume that the level of crowding is going to become that much more important, or one of the biggest concerns now, due to the COVID pandemic. And it's unfortunate, and I think Dr. Mateta also mentioned the fact that we're not doing enough research as an industry. And the last national household transport was done in terms of data collection was 2018, I think, in 2019. And so much has changed. And the importance from a customer or a commuter perspective would also have shifted. And it's one of those things where we need to be a bit more agile in terms of our data collection and reporting back to the industry, especially about commuter behavior. Focusing on the minibus taxi industry, they have a slightly different, or commuters have slightly different concerns when it comes to the minibus taxi industry. They're more concerned about safety. They're quite concerned about the fare levels. They're concerned about roadworthiness as well as the behavior of drivers. I think with regards to safety, it's honestly a view of miseducation from the commuters' perspective, because they are of the perception that some taxis are unsafe, or there's a lot of accidents that happen in taxis, but they are not necessarily exposed to a holistic view, because we know that the taxi industry is definitely one of the safest modes to travel with. And with regards to fare levels, we can only imagine the types of emotions that commuters went through when the taxi industry decided at some point that they wanted to increase their fare levels due to the fact that they were forced to that 60% capacity, and they were not making money as they were supposed to. So you can understand the negative feelings there coming from the commuters. Also, interestingly, on the red circle there, I circled the taxi marshal there with a piece of paper and a cell phone, and specifically looking at demand management. I think one of the best demand managers, although they're not technologically driven, has been the taxi industry, and this is why they're so successful, because they know when to be available for the customer at the most convenient time when they're needed by a customer, and most of access and accessibility as well of this mode is what has driven them to be more successful. So I would say, I mean, I would say that they're probably the best demand planners we have out there. We just need to find a way, as Dr. Mateta was also saying, to modernize them and modernize them in a sense of educating them on the new ways of doing things, because it's not to say that it's necessarily a wrong way of doing things. And then I just thought it would be interesting to look at what the national transport policy is saying around the commuter. So I just need to move this for a second. So the draft policy is basically agreeing with what we're saying, that the commuter actually is the most important person to consider when it comes to demand planning, because public transport is basically supposed to be an enabler for the customer to have access to goods and so on. It also says that the transport system needs to minimize constraints to mobility of passengers and goods by maximizing the speed and services while allowing customers the choice of transport mode and combination of transport modes where it is economically and financially viable. I think one of the missed opportunities is definitely with integrated transporting. I think I can't remember who mentioned it, to say that taxis or minibus are actually seen as feeders to the train mode, and if they're already feeding to the train mode in their own ecosystem, how much more could they do with other modes as well, in terms of being an enabler to the convenience of a commuter. And it speaks to that, the fact that there's a demand for the transport system to be more flexible in terms of the planning and the response to what consumers actually want. And it's about allowing the consumer to have the choice in terms of and tailoring the need of the transport to the operator as well as to the commuter. And looking at the modeling itself of transport, it's really about a shift in passenger policy, shifting it away from looking at more structural solutions to addressing the transport problems, and having an appropriate balance on the infrastructure balance. I mean, on the infrastructure supply, on the management of transport systems, as well as the way that passengers are using transport. I think there's definitely an opportunity for more research in understanding the why people are traveling, because that is usually that then would help the modeling to tailor to the needs of the commuters. And finally, as I was mentioning, I think integration is definitely key to meeting the needs of the customer, because it is central to convenience for the customer. And I think reliability and resilience are quite a given for the public transport industry. And appropriate technology choices. I quite enjoyed Citrek's presentation, and what I had in my mind was, why can't this same solution be used for the taxi industry or for the public transport industry? Why can't we? Where are the examples that speak to how the systems actually work for the public transport industry? And then the competition between the passenger transport modes, I think it speaks to that integration, because at the end of the day, everyone is trying to deliver on the convenience or on satisfying the client. And I think it also brings in that conversation around subsidies, whereby if the government was subsidizing all the modes, then there would be less competition for passengers within the modes, and then they'll be working together towards the goal of making sure that the commuter is delivered the service that they deserve. And the better placement of new low-cost housing and developments. I think this has also been a point that we spoke about around special planning. Because it's the root of some of the issues when it comes to public transport, especially with the minibus taxis. But certainly there needs to be better planning and possibly de-urbanization of some of the low-cost housing, or even moving them closer to their place of work, to convenient the commuter, as we said. And the integrated ticketing conversation, which we had on the last time as well, for me is quite important within the conversation of demand planning as an enabler to that insight and information on traveling behavior for the commuter. I think that is it from my presentation. Thank you so much, Harry.
Thank you, Cesar. Indeed, an excellent presentation. Thank you very much for this. We really appreciate it. You know, integrated solutions, yeah, surely that's where we should go.
Yeah.
And, you know, you asked the question, why is this technology of Ctrek not an attack in public transport industry? That's a very relevant question. And we're working on a type of solutions, you know, and we're talking to the right people on the right levels. That's why we've got people like yourselves involved. And, you know, also to think about the commuter to be able to choose a mode of transport, and all of them are safe, you know, and professional, and that's where we want to be. So thank you for the Bunya group and working in this direction, you know, and getting us there. We really appreciate that. And thank you for hosting us. Please stay online, and we will ask the other Eugene as well, and should they be from the other panelists available, they can also join in. Let's have a questions and answers session, so the other panelists can kindly also join in. We will give a few seconds for them to come in. All right, so let's throw the floor open, if I can say it like that, for anybody to ask a question to the panelists. You can unmute yourself and ask your question. You can address your question to any member of the panel or to the panel as a whole, and then we'll take it from there. let's give the audience some time to find themselves. I'm also looking at, I'm just getting all the systems going again here on my side. Lee, can Lee Stallworthy, I say you've got questions for Sizo. Can you please unmute yourself and ask the questions to Sizo? Thank you, Lee.
Thanks, Harry. I'm not sure what the rules are. Are panel members allowed to ask other panel members questions?
Indeed.
I think that's fine, Lee.
I think I just have a couple of questions because I think we've done similar work with regards to data analysis. And
yeah,
I'm just looking at my notes here. You had a slide around, I think it was called the basic elements for the traveler. And it seemed like a sets of decisions that people make with regards to how they travel. And my question around that is, I know that from work that we've done from the National Household Travel Survey, there's a section on there that deals with priorities, what people's priorities are in terms of travel. And it ranks them in terms of cost and crime and safety and time and all of those kind of things. And we've done some analysis of that, and we found out that there's quite a difference between the priority for different commuters in different income groups. Whereas in the lowest income groups, cost is the most important thing, where in the highest income groups, crime or safety may be the most important, or time. So in your slide, you had I just wanted to know if those things were in a priority order because you had cost at the bottom, or if that was kind of an average, or if, because there's obviously a difference between different income groups and different types of travelers in terms of the priority order of that thing. That's my one question.
Yeah.
I don't know if you want to answer that first, or if I could just ask the second question. The second one's much more simpler.
Oh, is it? No, so that was simply aggregated. We didn't look at the different age groups and the segments specifically yet. So it's basically just an average aggregated of all the commuter of travelers. But I know definitely that cost usually is a first concern for the lower income groups, which is why they were the ones that complained the most when, the association in Alex and Santon said they were going to double their cost for traveling because they weren't making money with the 60% capacity. So definitely cost becomes a biggest concern for the lower market segment,
Yeah. Okay, cool. And then, because there's obviously a spatial variable to that as well. You can spatialize that.
It's a spatial variable. Yeah.
And then my second question was, you had in one of your slides that a statistic on 26% of cost of income on transport. And I just wanted to know, is that on average, is that for a specific location, for a specific income group? Where does that figure come from? Because we've done our own version of that calculation.
Yeah.
And we found that there's some dynamics in that as well.
So that was from the 2013 National Household Survey. And I think they had looked at the last quintile, which is the guys that earn 9,000 plus. And that represented the 26% based on the guys that are earning close to 10%. 10,000 Rand a month. Yeah.
Okay, cool.
Yeah. So Lee, when is the report coming out? Because I'm quite interested in that.
Which one? The Urban Development Index?
No. The national household one, the one that they collected data for in 2019, 2018.
That's the burning question. When is the data coming out? I don't know.
Okay.
We have to speak to our colleagues.
I'll definitely be in touch with you as well to check what types of data you've got. So we can share some books. Thanks.
Questions and at least all of you also promised that he's going to present the urban development framework, if I can remember correctly, to us at this forum as well. So we're looking forward to that.
Sounds great, Lee. Thank you.
I see Verlene Manuel has got a question. Verlene, you're welcome to unmute and ask your question.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. I just would like to say that most of the commuters are women, based. And I'd like to know, Sizo, if your company has the national commuters to be able to report on issues, you know, as commuters nationally.
Thank you,
So
Verleen.
yeah, the information I used was from the National Household Travel Survey. So it's definitely representative of the population. I can check for you the data with regards to females and other information if you were interested in terms of safety and so on.
Correct. I'd love to have that.
So I think Harry would share my details somewhere, and then we can continue the conversation after. Yeah.
And then
Yes.
Harry, I just wanted to mention, you know, I went to the UK years back, and they've had actually, when you look here, Eugene and Caesar, and you hear the whole presentation, you know, they had a office where everything that's on the road in terms of the intermodal transport, you could monitor it online and you could see what was happening on the road with all the modes of transport. And I'm wondering, when are we going to come to that point where all the modes has got one central system online, and everything and all the players between government and everybody's on it, so that we have things that happen as it happens, and then it can be addressed.
Very relevant. For that,
Eileen, I was going to say, I think this is where the conversation about integration it needs to sort of come to play, because and it's step by step. Maybe ticketing is one of the first ways we can go around about integrating, and then we can see how else to use telematics to sort of create that one central system where we can monitor all of our modes. But I think it's I almost want to say it's an African problem where we need to solve for one at a time. To get us there. If the vision at the end of the day is to have that view of all the modes in one, then let's work towards that goal and start somewhere.
Okay, thank you.
I think also, Harry, if I could add to that, that's also a very interesting conversation, and that question from Verleen about, you know, overseas and in Europe, etc., and access to data and information that's available on the fly. I think a lesson that we've learned about apps and mobile phone apps and data and all of those kind of things is that as government, there are people that can do that much better than we can in the tech space. But what we need to do is we need to make the data available for the private tech industry sector to respond, to use that data. I read an article on, I think there's a website called Tech Radar some while ago, and the title of the article was "Why Transport for London Will Never Have Its Own Transport App." And the reason for that is because other people can do it better. The people that specialize in that kind of thing, but the data needs to be available for them to be able to do it through open data platforms, etc. And it's better for governments to invest in those platforms for pushing data out rather than developing the apps themselves.
Thank you, Lee. Any other questions to the panelists? Eugene, I'm just thinking about what we said about the cost versus benefits, you know, for this telemetry solution. Can you maybe elaborate a little bit on that?
Harry, yes. You know, it very much depends on, you know, and nobody has unlimited budget, unfortunately. That is a reality as well. So, you know, technology starts off very, very affordably, and, you know, it can come in as low as, you know, 100, 150 Rand a month. And it can be ramped up quite quickly to something that provides, you know, a very holistic picture. But, you know, the more things we add, the more cost becomes in there. But I think for us, the benefits can outweigh the costs considerably, you know. So really there are many places where we can save money, and even not save money directly, but, you know, improve our service levels. And you know, we've been talking about the public transport, and I enjoyed Cesar's presentation, and in terms of you know, I saw that one picture of the guy with the two-way radio, the controller that's basically managing the taxis, and, you know, that's the way that they've been working. But if I can share, maybe, you know, we were involved in a project, and apologies for going outside of the public transport environment, but we were involved in a project in a mining environment, where from a productivity perspective, they were basically counting the loads of coal, or of the stuff that they were carrying, but they had people standing there doing the work. And by using technology, and by using, you know, GPS positioning, and the accuracy of GPS positioning, combined with the ability to detect when a vehicle has been loaded and when a vehicle is offloaded, technology assisted them to count those loads more accurately. That resource that was sitting and counting could be deployed in a different way. And he actually started doing, you know, assisting in the terms of maintenance. So I think we can use technology in clever ways to make people and our valuable resources, our people, available to do better things, not to waste time, if I can call it that, you know. So I think, depending on the industry that you're in, the benefits and the value of the technology really can outweigh the cost of the technology considerably.
Eugene, but I'm quite sure that's part of what you guys do, is to come into an environment and do an assessment and see how this should be applied and implemented, and what resources should be used, and how they should do it, and consult on that level. I'm quite sure you guys do that.
That's what we do, Harry. You know, the reality is, you know, we are a technology supplier, but we want to be in a position to advise, you know, and consult with our clients to understand, you know, what are the challenges, you know, what are they facing. And, you know, from our experience and the way we have deployed our technology and how we've assisted other companies, gives us the opportunity to now advise our customers in the right way, you know, to analyze what needs to be measured, how can it be measured, and then, of course, to be able to realize that outcome, to realize that benefit at the end of the day. So yes, that's definitely something that we do.
Great stuff. Thank you, Eugene. Appreciate it. Can I ask that the panelists who are willing to do that, maybe share your contact details in the chat room, please, so that people can contact you guys. We really appreciate that. I have another question here, one in the chat box and one on YouTube. So I'm going to take the one from Frank Aspeling. He says, Lee, when will the integrated ticketing framework be available? So that's now for Lee Stollerthy.
I responded by typing in the chat box.
I see, sorry.
But just quickly, Frank, we've developed a first draft of a strategic framework for integrated ticketing. So it's not a integrated ticketing solution, but it's a framework for the considerations that need to be dealt with in terms of answering the question about integrated ticketing. So it looks at the various aspects and typologies and some of the business aspects that need to be considered. So it's a framework. It doesn't have a complete sets of answers, but identifies more questions that need to be answered. I would say, put it like that. So we still need to go through the council approval process before we can push it out there, I think. So we're probably still a few months off with regards to that.
Thank you, Lee. The question here on YouTube, Richard Malinga, he's asking, do we foresee in the medium term a seamless payment system for public transport across service providers? And that's a question everybody is asking. So maybe the panelists can respond, and maybe guys from Cuba Pay can also respond to this one.
Well, that's the integrated ticketing debate.
Yeah.
Can I just say, Harry, it's also relevant to public health. If the sooner we can get away from cash handling, particularly in the minibus industry, the sooner we were able to remove one of the cross-infection risks.
Oh, yes, absolutely. Thank you for that, Lee. Anybody
Well,
else
I can
want
answer
to?
here from Kuba Pay's part. This is Donnie Goosen speaking. Yes, as per what I mentioned earlier this morning, we have very exciting new developments we are going to bring to the market. It's one of the reasons why VIX has now turned into Cuba for Africa, for the African market. So yes, we are working and basically already have something that we are prepared to bring to market very soon that will be a seamless integration across modes of transport. So watch this space. Thank you.
Donnie, thank you. We're watching. Very exciting. Thank you very much for that one.
Harry?
Yes, Izu?
I wanted to say, I actually came across a study last week that was looking at all the cashless payment systems that have been trialed in Africa, including Southern Africa. And what was interesting was 90% of them were still in pilots or pilot and stalled. And I'd like to believe that the solution can be applied, but it's about understanding the economics of the industry. And I think when people try to use these ticketing or cashless systems without considering what it means for instance, for the complex industry that is minibus taxi, where you have I don't know how many 100,000 owners, which are the operators. So it can be definitely quite complex, but it's a solution that we need. And I'm quite interested as well in we're quite busy. We're busy with one pilot at the moment, and it's not going in because we're trying to say how for the operator. At the end of the day, who's the owner of the business. The fact that it's cashless is not the issue. The commuter and the consumers are already used to paying with their cards. But how do you solve for the owner? Because if the owner does not want to use that, it doesn't matter whether the person has a card or not. It will not work for the industry.
Yeah, I think, Harry, if I can just add to that, I mean, what Cesar said there is 100% spot on, and we're on the same page there, I think, as a city, because you know, the technology is the answer. It's not the question. You know, so you don't start off with a technological solution and try and apply it to a problem. You try and understand the problem first and figure out how you need to solve it, and then look for the technological solution that fits that problem. So that's the kind of the approach that we're taking. Is we're trying to unpack the principles of what an integrated ticketing system needs to achieve in terms of the commuter, the operator, as well as the contracting authority for public transport in that particular area of jurisdiction or whatever it is. So that's, you know, I think it's an important consideration that you need to unpack those things, that what you wanted to achieve first before you look for the technological solution to it.
And can I add to that, Harry?
Yes, please.
In my research with the drivers, I asked about cash handling versus cashless fare systems. And the immediate response was they have to use cash to buy fuel, pay vehicle washes, pay bribes, but also do some minor repairs to the vehicles. So they made the point that one can't redesign one system without also then dealing with other systems, such as then you need a garage card, etc. And they were unanimous in saying the owners will never buy it. The owners prefer a cash-based economy within the industry.
Thank you, Lee. Anybody else who want to ask a question or comments from our panelists? All right, I'm just scanning here. I think we've addressed all the questions. Let's give our panelists an opportunity for closing remarks. Maybe we can start with Eugene.
Harry, thank you. Thank you again for the opportunity. And yeah, you know, as we said, you know, there's many technologies out there. There's many ways technology can be used, and I want to, you know, latch on to what Lee just said. You know, the technology can solve these issues. That's not the question. I think the question here is what do we want to solve, and how best can we implement technology to assist us. I think there's many ways that we can address this. So you know, thank you again for the opportunity, and yeah, all the best.
Thank you so much, Eugene. Anyone besides Sizu, any of the other panelists who want to say a few words, closing remarks?
Yes, Harry, I would like to.
Thank you, Lee.
Just coming back to my point that there's tremendous moral outrage that gets directed to taxi drivers. I just would like to encourage the audience to see those drivers as an indicator species. And what they show is some truths about the transport system as a whole. And unless we start taking a system approach, we're not going to deal with some of the ills of what is happening on our roads. So please empathize with the drivers and realize that when you point one finger in their direction, multiple fingers are actually pointing back towards yourself, especially if you're a single occupant vehicle user. We are as much a part of the problem as the behavior of minibus taxi drivers.
Thank you, Lee, for that wisdom. Lee Stolworthy, you want to say a few words?
Thanks, Harry. I've probably said enough already today, but yeah, I think a few things that's been encouraging about this session is that there's quite a few common threads between the presentations of the various speakers. You know, there's quite a few things that are relevant to travel demand management as a topic in general. One is the spatial dynamic of why people travel, and what's causing people to move around, and how to quantify that, and the role of data in answering those questions and understanding those dynamics, I think, is key. You know, Eugene has shown really brilliant examples of how you can apply data and technology to answer some of those key questions around how people are moving. And I think, you know, from Lee's presentation around the taxi industry and the role that they have, and acknowledging that that is a critical mode in the general mix of public transport, but understanding how it fits and what the role it should need to play. I think it's frustratingly short period of time to have this conversation because there's a lot to talk about. But I think, yeah, it's very encouraging conversation to have. And thanks for allowing me to participate.
Thank you so much, Lee. Appreciate your time. Before I give our host opportunity to do the closure and closing remarks, just want to say that the next Transport Forum will be 6th of August, and this I'm just seeing Caesar de Bakwane is talking to us here. He says he's from Caesar. You can unmute yourself and tell us what you want to tell us, please. Sifu de Bakwane, can unmute yourself and tell us what you're saying.
All right, thanks, Harry. Good. I suppose I'm saying goodbye to everyone because I came right at the end. I had just opened my emails. I realized that I have a note. Now, well, I didn't get the luxury of the discussion that ensued. I am from the National Department of Transport. One of the things that we are doing currently as part of the interventions that came from the National Transport Master Plan, was around the need to do a national transport demand management policy. Now, what we have done, I think in the last financial year that we came with, we did a desktop study that is coupled with consultations with the local authorities, a few of them, and by way of collecting data and asking, we used a questionnaire to collect data from them around the challenges and what can be done in local authorities, and also what can be the intervention from national government. So in this year, unfortunately, we were disturbed by the virus. We were in the middle of trying to develop the policy. So we are doing that, and I suppose we will see how it goes, and also with time, we'll probably want to present our thoughts to this forum, and which I have been engaging with this forum for quite some time now, and I think it'll be interesting to see how the thoughts are coming. Unfortunate or unfortunate, COVID-19 is actually pointing out to one of the issues we've identified around telecommuting, what we are doing here with this software of Zoom. It's one of the interventions around the need to stagger our work issues so that you give more space to the road so that you alleviate congestion as it were. All right. I suppose my request will be to get the recorded audio of the discussions that ensued. It will be quite beneficial to us to get the thoughts that have been presented, discussed upon. Thank you.
Absolutely, for important comment you're making there. I just want to mention this meeting is being live streamed to YouTube. So if you go to the Transport Forum's website, you should see the link that you can use to see this event on YouTube, and the presentations that's been made available will also be uploaded to our website so you guys can download it, and it's all obviously complimentary. I can quickly share my screen just to show you the website again. Just get there quickly. So there's the Transport Forum website. You can go to that website. There you will find a link on the front page for the YouTube channel. I would recommend you guys subscribe to this YouTube channel so that you can receive notifications when we do events in future as well. So that usually works quite well. So I highly recommend doing that. You can download presentations from that website. All right, so I just want to mention that and Sefer, definitely we will invite you guys to come and present. Thank you. In future, the framework you guys are working on, we're looking forward to that. As I was saying, the next Transport Forum will be 6th of August. It's all about how bus companies can stand up after post-COVID. And our prime host for this event is Optibus. It's actually head offices in Tel Aviv. So we've got international presenters presenting case studies from Tel Aviv and so on. We've already got more than 100 people who's already booked for this event. So make yourself your bookings. We've got Golden Arrow Bus Services also presenting. Very interesting event. So you guys welcome to join in. And then Ubunya Group is going to host on the 20th of August again, this forum, also a virtual event. And we're working to get this agenda compiled. You know, originally we planned to talk about policies and regulation and so on. But, you know, if you think about it, and the advice I'm getting from you learned people is that why should we talk about standards, policy and regulation? There are a lot of that already on the shelves. You know, we should rather talk about how we doing things effectively, how should we implement all of this and so on and make it work. So that's my advice is, or I'm actually asking you guys, you're welcome to make some comments for me, suggestions, what we should address in terms of doing things right in public transport on the 20th of August. I'll appreciate your inputs. So thank you very much for that. So now I want to give Sisu, our host from Ubunya Group, opportunity to do the closing remarks. Thank you very much, Sisu.
Pleasure, Harry. I just want to thank everyone and all of our guest speakers today for gracing us with your insights, your knowledge, as well as your time. And thank you to our esteemed guests and our participants for all of those that asked questions. Yeah, so and just thank you for engaging in the conversations. I think we are very encouraged by the continuous conversations around public transport, and we definitely want to continue the conversations. Yeah, thank you so much, and we'll see you next time. Lee, we'll be in touch.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. And thank you for hosting us. And we wish you guys all the best and see you at the forum soon. Take care. Thank you for your time. Take care, everybody.
Thanks,
Bye-bye.
guys. Be safe.
Thank you. Bye-bye.